My name's Maggie, and I work for a company. I'm 29 years old and just tied the knot with my husband William. We dated for over 2 years before getting hitched. We kicked off our married life in the apartment I've had since my single days. Dad gifted it to me when I landed this job. With my brother and his wife moving back in with our folks, I figured it was time for me to spread my wings. Dad, being well off, got me a nice apartment close to our family home when I started working. Not sure if he wanted to lend a hand whenever I needed, or just keep me nearby. But either way, I ended up in a fantastic place. When my husband and I decided to tie the knot, his cramped apartment wasn't going to cut it for the both of us. Luckily, I had a spacious place that didn't cost me a dime in rent, so he moved in with me right away. The first time I visited his family's home in a snowy area was during winter. I was blown away by the amount of snow and how chilly it was. Growing up in the city, his family's home felt like a whole new world to me. His mom and brother lived in this quaint old house straight out of a fairy tale, surrounded by fields. Back when my father-in-law was around, they did some farming on the side. Their nearest neighbors were a bit of a hike away. My husband had been living in a tiny apartment, too cramped for both of us. Luckily, I had a spacious place that didn't cost a cent in rent, so he moved in with me right away when we decided to tie the knot. The first time I visited his family's home in a snowy area was during winter. I was amazed by the vast amount of snow and how cold it was. Growing up in the city, his family's home felt like a whole new world to me. His mom and brother lived in this charming old house straight out of a fairy tale. Back when my father-in-law was alive, they used to do some farming on the side. Their house was surrounded by fields, with the nearest neighbors a bit of a trek away. What surprised me even more was that the bathroom was outside the house. I thought I could handle it for short visits, but the idea of living there long-term seemed daunting, especially in winter when it's snowy and freezing. Venturing out to the toilet in the middle of the night takes a lot of bravery. Plus, after a shower, I worried about catching a cold from the chilly temperatures when I visited to meet them for our wedding. I didn't stay overnight, so I didn't experience the shower ordeal, but dealing with the outdoor toilet was definitely tough. However, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law were very kind, which put me at ease. Even though we wouldn't be living together, I wanted to foster a harmonious relationship with them as we became one family, but something nagged at me. While my mother-in-law always greeted me warmly, I noticed she seemed to murmur complaints when alone with my husband. What worried me more was my brother-in-law's previous marriage, which ended in divorce after just a year, a topic my husband avoided discussing. I wanted to ask, but since my husband remained tight-lipped about it, I didn't press the issue. At our wedding, my mother-in-law wore a radiant smile, prompting my father to comment on her kindness. I smiled back, though my own mother had reservations. Despite her smiles in public, she seemed rather sour when she thought no one was watching. "Watch out, she might be two-faced," my mother cautioned. Still, I chose to believe there wouldn't be any problems unless we lived together. We started our married life in the apartment happily, free of worries. However, just 3 months into marriage, my husband began to dump all the household chores on me and make decisions without consulting me. Despite our agreement to share chores since we both worked, he started slacking off. Initially, he helped with tasks like cleaning the bathroom and occasionally cooking dinner when I came home late. But recently, he's become reluctant to do even basic cleaning, leaving me to handle everything, including dinner preparation. Sometimes when I'm cooking after a long day, he'll impatiently demand, "Hurry up, I'm hungry," which only adds to my frustration. Beyond the chores, what really bothers me is his unilateral decision-making. Perhaps there were signs I missed before marriage, or maybe I misjudged him as a decisive and dependable man. Not long after tying the knot, furniture and a sofa suddenly appeared in our home. I was taken aback and asked my husband, "What's going on? Where are we going to put all this new furniture?" He just smiled and said, "I didn't feel the current vibe of our room suited me, so I decided to switch up the furniture for something more to my liking." He wanted to get rid of all the furniture I had chosen and replace it with pieces that matched his taste. If he had talked to me first, we could have picked out furniture together. But he acted on his own, completely disregarding my preferences. It's fine for him to decorate his own space however he wants. But I didn't appreciate him changing our shared living area without discussion. His sense of design didn't seem to make much sense, and I was left speechless by the mismatched colors and shapes of the new furniture. Then came an unexpected proposal. "It'd be great if you could foot the bill for it." After all, this was originally your apartment, right? I was already frustrated that he had taken over the living room with his tasteless furniture, and now he was asking me to pay for it. I wondered if he was joking and asked again, "What? Why should I pay for it? Besides, it's the furniture you bought on your own." I usually don't speak up, but this time I stood my ground. My husband seemed at a loss for words, but it was clear he didn't want to spend his own money. This year marked our first Christmas since getting married, so we decided to spend the holidays at his parents' place. It was my first time staying at their house, so I was feeling anxious and nervous. My mother-in-law spoke kindly, "Maggie, just relax and make yourself at home." However, I couldn't fully let my guard down, mindful of my mother's advice. I remained cautious, sensing there might be more to my mother-in-law than meets the eye. When I first arrived, she did nothing but rest, sharing stories of how brides used to eat alone in the kitchen in the past. "It's nice that we can all eat together now," I said, puzzled by her tales from yesteryears. I noticed my brother-in-law cautioning her, but my husband seemed oblivious. Enduring her sarcastic remarks, I offered to clean up after dinner. She smiled but declined, saying, "I'll handle it. Wouldn't want you to break any of our precious dishes." That's when I realized my mother's advice was on point. The first day was filled with her biting sarcasm, and unfortunately, things only took a turn for the worse the next day. That evening, my husband went out drinking with friends, and with my brother-in-law away on a fire brigade trip, it was just my mother-in-law and me at home. Honestly, I felt quite nervous. After dinner, while she was in the shower, I finally got a moment to relax. But when she emerged, she said, "I'm off to bed now. Don't forget to lock the front door." I awkwardly replied, "Okay," and prepared to take a shower in a separate bathhouse, which was quite chilly. Locals might be used to it, but for me, it was a bit of a challenge. Once I settled in, the lights in the main house suddenly went out. As I relaxed in the bathtub, I thought I heard footsteps outside, so I stayed still and listened carefully. After a while, everything went pitch dark. Initially, I thought it was a power outage, but when I peeked out the window, I noticed the lights in the neighboring house were still on. That's when I started to suspect if my mother-in-law was playing a mean prank on me. I didn't want to believe she would do something so cruel, but given her tendency to make sarcastic remarks with a smile, a sense of unease began to creep into my heart. Feeling a sense of urgency, I hurried out of the shower, dried off, and changed into my pajamas. The room was completely dark at first, making it hard to see anything. But as my eyes adjusted, the moonlight seeping through the window helped me navigate. While I couldn't help but think how immature this prank was, I attempted to open the door to leave, only to find it stubbornly stuck shut, resisting all my efforts to force it open. Panic started to grip me. There was a window, but it was barred from the outside. Thankfully, I had my smartphone with me. I tried calling my husband for help, but he didn't pick up. On the third attempt, he finally answered, shouting loudly, "Why are you bothering me? Can't you see I'm busy right now?" It was clear he was drunk, but I desperately needed his assistance, so I pleaded with him. "I'm stuck in the bathroom. Please come over right away," I pleaded urgently. But it seemed he either didn't grasp the seriousness or didn't care, replying dismissively, "You shouldn't have taken a shower now. I'm too drunk to help. Goodbye." After he hung up, I dialed his number repeatedly, but it seemed he'd switched off his phone. I debated calling the police or fire department, but I wanted to exhaust all options before resorting to that. I hesitated to involve the authorities, fearing my mother-in-law's wrath. First, I tried to find a way out on my own. I thought perhaps if I shouted from the bathroom window, someone passing by might hear me. But to my dismay, the window was frozen shut. My husband had mentioned that the pipes sometimes freeze. If I were to remain trapped here all night, I could freeze to death. Just as I was on the verge of reluctantly dialing the police, a voice from outside startled me. "Is there a power outage? Hello? Is anyone in there?" Relief washed over me upon hearing that voice. I heard a series of knocks, indicating someone was trying to assist, and before long, the door creaked open. Gratefully, I thanked the elderly gentleman who had come to my aid. He sighed and remarked, "She never seems to learn, does she? Always finding ways to make life difficult for her daughter-in-law." This kind neighbor was familiar with my husband's family, a distant relative of his. He escorted me to his own home nearby. Upon seeing me, his wife appeared surprised. After the gentleman explained the situation, she warmly welcomed me inside. With a comforting gesture, she offered me a blanket since I was only dressed in pajamas and served me a cup of steaming hot tea. Once I had regained my composure, the elderly gentleman shared with me the unsettling history of my mother-in-law's treatment of her daughters-in-law. Your mother-in-law has a history of mistreating her son's wives. She's trapped several of them in the bathroom before. The wife of the eldest son was repeatedly locked in there and eventually left the household because of it. And it's not just her. When my husband was engaged to someone else before, the mother-in-law did the same thing to her. The elderly couple had noticed the bathroom light shining through the darkness and grew suspicious, prompting them to come and investigate. They knew about my mother-in-law's past actions and had come to the aid of others in similar situations before. Aware of our marriage, they seemed concerned that my mother-in-law might repeat her harmful behavior. Since it was already late and the main house was locked up, I decided to spend the night with the neighbors. The next morning, I was roused from sleep by the wail of an ambulance siren. Peering out the window, I spotted the ambulance pulling up at my in-laws' place, with my husband standing motionless near the detached bathroom. Curious, I made my way over. Perhaps my husband had mistakenly thought I was still trapped in the bathroom and called for help. But of course, the bathroom was empty. I felt a pang of sympathy for the paramedics, who had been summoned due to my husband's misunderstanding. As soon as my husband laid eyes on me, he erupted, "Why is my mom lying there? Weren't you trapped in the bathroom?" Startled, I glanced inside, only to spot a figure sprawled on the floor. The woman whom the paramedics were tending to sat up, gingerly touching the back of her head. It appeared she wasn't in grave danger, and I recognized her silhouette. It was my mother-in-law. Perplexed as to why she was there, I listened as one of the paramedics explained. "She seems to have taken a fall and lost consciousness. We'll take her to the hospital for a checkup. It looks like she slipped on some soap on the floor." In my panic during the blackout, I must have left things scattered, like the soap. With no light to clean up, it seems my mother-in-law slipped and fell when she entered the bathroom to check on me in the early hours of the morning. As my mother-in-law was wheeled past on a stretcher, she shot me a stern glare. When my husband was taken to the hospital in an ambulance, the neighbors approached and offered their sympathy, saying, "We're relieved you're okay. It's like a form of divine retribution for the mistreatment you've endured as a daughter-in-law." I expressed my gratitude to them once more, realizing that without the elderly neighbors' help, I could have been the one being rushed to the hospital. After changing clothes, I informed my brother-in-law about my mother-in-law's hospitalization. He hurried off to join her there. Left alone, I made my way to the detached bathroom, pondering over the events of the previous night. At the bathroom door, I noticed a stick wedged in to keep it shut. That explained why I couldn't open it. That afternoon, my mother-in-law returned home from the hospital with my husband and brother-in-law, and she directed her anger at me. "If you had stayed in the bathroom and let me know, none of this would have happened." Before I could respond, my husband joined in, expressing his frustration. "Exactly. If Maggie had just stayed put, my mother wouldn't be in this situation." However, my brother-in-law angrily intervened. "What's wrong with you two? Stop this cruel game of locking my sister-in-law in the bathroom." Later, my brother-in-law returned with a travel bag and announced to my husband and mother-in-law, "I'm done taking care of my mother. I'm leaving this house. Do as you please." Unable to endure it any longer, I turned to my brother-in-law and asked, "I'm leaving too. Could you drop me off at the nearest station?" Despite my husband's attempts to stop me, I stood my ground. "Let's get a divorce. You didn't help me when I needed it yesterday. I'll prepare the divorce papers." I got into my brother-in-law's car, and he drove me to the station, apologizing repeatedly. "I'm truly sorry, Maggie. I never imagined you would go through this. Those cruel people are no longer family to me." I returned to my apartment, prepared the divorce papers, and began packing my husband's belongings. When he returned and saw his things packed, he initially thought I was joking about divorce. But his shock turned to anger when he saw the actual papers. "You're ending our marriage over something so trivial? You weren't even hurt, were you?" Realizing it was futile to argue, I silently handed him the papers. With reluctance, he signed them and left the apartment. However, it became evident that he didn't have the means to rent another place or hadn't found one yet. The truth was, throughout our marriage, he had been dependent on my income, often spending recklessly and even accumulating debt. After leaving our home, my husband initially stayed with a coworker. But as time passed, even that support faded, and he found himself increasingly isolated. Losing his home, evading debt collectors, and eventually losing his job, he found himself in a dire financial crisis. My mother-in-law has become a topic of neighborhood gossip, with rumors circulating that she drove her daughter-in-law to divorce. It seems she's now avoided by others, and according to my brother-in-law, she lives a solitary life, much like my husband. With my brother-in-law also gone, she's left to manage on just her pension, facing financial strain. In rural areas, having a car is essential, but with no one at home and a strained relationship with the neighbors, she's unable to receive any assistance. It appears my mother-in-law, abandoned by both family and neighbors, lives alone. As for my husband, he's consumed by his own troubles and lacks the means to aid his mother. After our divorce, I replaced the tacky furniture he chose with pieces I love. I've embarked on a new chapter, hopeful for a brighter future and open to new, positive experiences.
Hey, you gonna just sit there all day? Mrs. Thompson's voice cut through the silence like a knife. I was in my makeshift office, a small table in the corner of the bedroom, trying to focus on my web design project. I looked up, meeting her stern gaze. Just working, Mrs. Thompson, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. She snorted, clearly unimpressed. Working? Looks like you're just playing on that computer. When I was your age, I had real chores. I sighed inwardly. This was a daily ritual. Ever since I moved into the Thompson house, after marrying Mark, her son, I'd felt like an outsider. Mark, a kind-hearted man with a constant travel schedule for work, was my rock. But with him away, the house felt cold, uninviting. Anna, Mark's sister, walked in, her 2 kids trailing behind her. "Mom, have you seen my phone charger?" she asked, ignoring me completely. "Try the living room," Mrs. Thompson suggested, still eyeing me suspiciously. I returned to my screen, trying to block out their conversation. Anna's kids, Lily and Max, ran around, their shrieks piercing the air. I loved kids, but these 2 were wild, unchecked. "Rose, can you watch the kids? I need to run an errand," Anna said, assuming more than asking. "I really need to finish this project, Anna," I replied, feeling the pressure. "It's not like you're doing anything important," she retorted, her voice tinged with condescension. I bit back a sharper retort. Mark always said to keep the peace. But it was hard, especially with Anna treating me like a free babysitter and her mother questioning my every move. The door opened, and Mark stepped in, a brief respite in my day. "Hey, love," he greeted, wrapping his arms around me. "Hey," I smiled, feeling a momentary relief. "How's everyone?" he asked, looking around. "Just the usual," I replied, glancing at his mother and sister. Mrs. Thompson interjected, "Mark, tell your wife to help more around here. She's always on that computer." Mark looked at me, then back at his mother. "Mom, Rose works hard. Her job is just as valid as any other." Anna rolled her eyes. "Sure, if you call sitting all day work. Mark sighed. "Anna, let's not start this again." I appreciated Mark's support, but I could tell he was tired of playing mediator. As he left to unpack, Mrs. Thompson gave me a look that could curdle milk. "Remember, Rose, this is my house. You follow my rules," she said sharply. I nodded, feeling the familiar knot of frustration in my stomach. I was an orphan, with no family to turn to. This was my home now, but it didn't feel like it. As I turned back to my computer, I promised myself that things would change. Mark and I were saving for our own place. A home where respect and kindness weren't foreign concepts. A place where I could work in peace, love openly, and be myself. The house was buzzing with noise, but I felt more alone than ever. Mark had just left for another one of his work trips, and the emptiness he left behind was tangible. I was in the kitchen, trying to fix myself some toast, when Mrs. Thompson barged in. "Can't you make something more useful? You're always eating bread. No wonder you're so skinny," she remarked, her tone dripping with disdain. Just not very hungry, Mrs. Thompson, I replied, keeping my voice calm. You'd be hungry if you did some real work around here, she shot back, rummaging through the fridge. I sighed and left the kitchen with my toast. Eating in my room seemed like a better option than enduring another round of criticism. Later, as I tried to concentrate on my work, Anna's voice echoed from the hallway. Rose, can you watch the kids again? I've got to run out. Anna, I really need to get this work done. It's important, I responded, feeling the frustration build up. Oh, come on, it's just clicking around on a computer. How hard can it be? Anna retorted, her voice laced with sarcasm. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to argue. It was easier to agree than to start another fight. Fine, I'll watch them, I conceded. As I tried to manage Lily and Max, who were more interested in playing tag around my workspace, I realized how isolated I felt in this house. Surrounded by people, yet so alone. That night, I heard Anna and Mrs. Thompson talking in the living room. She's not right for Mark. Just sits in her room all day, doing God knows what on that computer. Mrs. Thompson's voice was sharp and clear. Yeah, and have you noticed how she never joins us for meals anymore? As if she's too good for us, Anna added, her words like daggers. I lay in bed, their words stinging. I missed Mark's presence, his understanding. He was the buffer between me and their constant judgment. Without him, it felt like I was an easy target. The next day, as I made myself another solitary meal, Mrs. Thompson walked in. You know, if you spent more time with us, maybe you'd feel more part of the family, she said, her tone accusatory. I looked at her, feeling the irony of her words. I try, Mrs. Thompson, but it's hard when I feel like everything I do is wrong in your eyes, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She just huffed and walked out, leaving me alone again. I realized then that no matter how much I tried, I would always be an outsider in this house. My presence was tolerated, not welcomed. And with Mark away, the thin veneer of family harmony was quickly unraveling. The day started like any other, but it turned into the worst day of my life. I was in my room, headphones on, when Anna barged in without knocking. Your phone's been ringing off the hook, she said, her voice unusually somber. I pulled off my headphones, feeling a knot in my stomach. Who is it? I asked, reaching for my phone. It's Mark's company, she replied, avoiding my gaze. My hands trembled as I answered the call. The voice on the other end was calm, but the words were like a sledgehammer. There's been an accident. Mark's plane. I'm so sorry. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. My whole world collapsed in that moment. Mark, my husband, my best friend, gone. I don't remember much after that. I vaguely recall Mrs. Thompson and Anna in the living room, their voices a distant echo. Did you hear about Mark? Mrs. Thompson's voice was flat, almost emotionless. Yeah, what a shame. But you know, with his job, it was always a risk, Anna replied, her tone too casual for the gravity of the situation. Their words felt like a betrayal. Where was the grief? The loss? It was as if Mark was just an inconvenience removed from their lives. In the days that followed, I was a ghost in the house, barely eating, barely existing. Mark's funeral was a blur. I remember standing there, feeling the weight of my loneliness, surrounded by people who were supposed to be family. But a new shock awaited me. Amidst my sorrow, I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a confusing mix of joy and heartache. A part of Mark was still with me, yet he'd never know. After the funeral, Mrs. Thompson's true colors shone brighter than ever. Rose, we need to talk about the house, she said, her voice cold and calculating. I looked at her, not comprehending. What about the house? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You can't stay here anymore. Now that Mark's gone, there's no reason for you to be here, she stated bluntly. I felt the room spin. But this was my home with Mark, I protested weakly. Was. Past tense. You need to find somewhere else to live, she said, her eyes void of any sympathy. Anna chimed in.
Yeah,
Rose, it's time to move on. You don't really belong here anyway. I need to tell you something, I began, my voice shaky. I'm pregnant. Mark was going to be a father. Their reaction was nothing like I expected. Mrs. Thompson scoffed. Pregnant? That's convenient. Trying to find a reason to stay here, are you? Anna joined in.
yeah,
Right. As if we'd believe that. You just don't want to leave. I stood there, stunned. Their words stung more than I could express. It's true, I insisted, my voice barely above a whisper, but they just laughed it off. I packed my bags in a daze, each item a reminder of the life I had lost. As I was about to leave, I turned to them. You're kicking me out at the worst time of my life. How can you be so cruel? Mrs. Thompson looked at me, her expression unmoved. Life's tough. You better learn that fast. With nowhere to go, I left the house, each step away feeling like a descent into an unknown abyss. The future was a dark void, and I was walking into it alone. A month had passed since Mark's funeral, and I was living with Aunt Sarah, his kind-hearted aunt who had taken me in. The grief was still raw, but life had to go on, especially now that I was pregnant. I was in the middle of a web design project when Aunt Sarah called me from the living room. Rose, there's a call for you. Sounds important. Curious, I answered the phone. Hello, this is Rose. Mrs. Thompson, I'm John from Greenfield Notary. I'm calling about your late husband's last affairs, the voice on the other end said. My heart skipped a beat. What about them? I asked. Your husband had a life insurance policy, and you're the sole beneficiary. It's a substantial amount, John explained. I felt a mix of shock and relief. How much are we talking about? I inquired, trying to keep my voice steady. It's quite a large sum, Ms. Rose. Enough to secure a good future for you and your child, he replied. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. This money could change everything. I could start a new life, provide for my baby, maybe even move to a place of our own. I shared the news with Aunt Sarah. That's wonderful, Rose. Mark always was thoughtful. He's taken care of you even now, she said, her eyes moist. The news of the insurance money spread quickly, and it wasn't long before Mrs. Thompson called. Rose, I heard about the insurance. We need to talk, she said, her tone insistent. I braced myself. What about it, Mrs. Thompson? You know, since you're the beneficiary, I think it's only fair that you share some of that money with us. After all, we're Mark's family too, she demanded. I couldn't believe her audacity. Share the money? After you kicked me out when I needed you the most? I replied, my voice firm. Well, we have expenses too, and you're living off my son's money, she retorted. That money is for me and my child, Mrs. Thompson. I won't give you a dime, I said, the resolve in my voice surprising even me. Think about it, Rose. Don't be selfish, she said before hanging up. But I had made up my mind. I was going to use that money to start a new life, far from the judgment and cruelty of Mrs. Thompson and Anna. I began looking for apartments, something cozy and welcoming, a place where I could raise my child in peace. The thought of having my own space, a sanctuary for me and my baby, filled me with hope. 6 months into my pregnancy, I was finally settling into my new apartment. It was a small, cozy place, filled with the promise of new beginnings. I had just finished setting up the baby's crib when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to see Mrs. Thompson and Anna standing at my door when I opened it. Rose, we need to talk, Mrs. Thompson said, pushing past me into the apartment. Anna followed her, eyeing the place with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Nice little spot you got here, she remarked, her tone laced with envy. What are you doing here? I asked, trying to mask my discomfort. Mrs. Thompson took a deep breath. We've been thinking about how things ended between us. We want to apologize. I was taken aback. Apologize? After you threw me out? Anna chimed in. Look, Rose, we were upset. But we're family, right? We should stick together. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Family? You made it clear I was no longer part of your family. Mrs. Thompson glanced at my swollen belly and her tone softened. We didn't know about the baby. We want to make things right. I scoffed. Now that you see I'm actually pregnant, you suddenly care? It's not just that, Anna said quickly. Things have been tough since you left. We thought maybe you could come back. Help out. I stared at them, incredulous. You want me to come back after everything? Mrs. Thompson took a step forward. We need your help, Rose. Financially, we're struggling. I shook my head in disbelief. So, this isn't about making amends. You just need money. Anna's face hardened. Look, Rose, we all have to make sacrifices. You have the means to help the family. I felt a surge of anger. I am not your family. Not anymore. You made that clear when you kicked me out. Mrs. Thompson's expression faltered. Rose, please. Think of it as helping for the sake of your child's grandparents. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Grandparents? You never once acted like grandparents. You won't see a cent from me. And you certainly won't be a part of my child's life. The realization dawned on their faces. They had hoped for an easy solution to their problems, but I was no longer the same person they had once manipulated. Anna tried a different approach. Rose, be reasonable. It's not good to hold grudges, especially in your condition. My condition has nothing to do with this. You made your bed, now lie in it, I said firmly. Defeated, Mrs. Thompson turned towards the door. You'll regret this, Rose. Family is everything. As they left, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They had come expecting to find the same vulnerable girl they had once known, but I had grown stronger, more resilient. I looked around my apartment, at the little crib that awaited my child, and I knew I had made the right decision. My future, and my child's future, was here, in this new life I had built for us. Living in my own space, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. My pregnancy was advancing well, and I was busy preparing for my new role as a mother. One evening, as I was browsing online for baby supplies, my phone rang. It was Aunt Sarah. Rose, have you heard the latest about the Thompsons? She asked, her voice tinged with a mix of concern and disbelief. No, what happened? I replied, pausing my browsing. They're selling the house. Apparently, they're in deep financial trouble, Aunt Sarah informed me. I was stunned. The house? But that's been in their family for years. Seems like they can't afford to keep it anymore. Anna's husband lost his job, and without your financial contribution, they've hit rock bottom, she explained. I felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. I can't believe they're selling the house. Where will they go? From what I heard, they're moving into a much smaller place. Anna is not taking it well. She's had to get a job at a local store, Aunt Sarah said. The news hit me unexpectedly. Anna, who had always looked down on anyone who worked a regular job, was now working in retail. Wow, that's a big change for her, I said, trying to process the information. Yeah, she's been complaining to anyone who'll listen. But, you know, maybe this will be a good lesson for her. A bit of hard work never hurt anyone, Aunt Sarah added. I thought about how much my life had changed since leaving the Thompson house. I guess we all get what we deserve eventually, I mused. We chatted a bit more before saying our goodbyes. I sat back and thought about the twist of fate. Mrs. Thompson and Anna, once so proud and unyielding, were now facing their own struggles. It was a harsh reality, but one that seemed fitting given how they had treated me. I had learned the hard way that kindness and compassion were invaluable, and their absence could lead to a fall from grace. As I resumed browsing for baby items, I felt a renewed sense of gratitude for the life I was building. My journey had been tough, but it led me to a place of independence and inner strength. The day I brought my son, Leo, home marked the start of a beautiful yet challenging journey. He was a bundle of joy, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, bringing a sense of purpose and love I had never known. As I watched him sleep peacefully in his crib, I thought about returning to my work as a web designer. Aunt Sarah had been my rock through all the upheaval, always there to offer support and wisdom. "You're going to balance this just fine, Rose," she reassured me one evening as we sat in the living room, Leo cradled in my arms. "You're strong, and you've got a good head on your shoulders." I smiled, grateful for her encouragement. "Thanks, Aunt Sarah. I just want to give Leo the best life possible." It was during one of these peaceful afternoons that my phone rang, shattering the calm. The caller ID showed Anna's number, a name I hadn't seen in months. With a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself. "Rose, you need to give us money. You're living all posh while we're scraping by." Anna's voice was sharp, tinged with desperation. I was taken aback by her blunt demand. "Anna, I'm not responsible for your financial situation. I have my own family to take care of now." "You always think you're better than us, don't you? Just because you got that insurance money," she retorted, her voice rising. "I've just given birth to a child, Anna. My focus is on my son now," I replied, trying to keep my composure. "I don't care about your kid. We need that money, Rose," she yelled into the phone. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. How could she be so heartless? Without another word, I hung up the phone and immediately blocked her number. The nerve of her, demanding money and disregarding the fact that I was a new mother, struggling with my own challenges. Aunt Sarah, who had overheard the conversation, put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Don't let her get to you, Rose. You're doing what's best for you and Leo." I nodded, still shaken by the call. I just can't believe she would stoop so low. "It's unfortunate, but some people only think of themselves. You just focus on your baby and your work. You're doing great," Aunt Sarah encouraged. As I rocked Leo in my arms, I realized that this was my world now. My son, my work, and the new life I was building. No amount of guilt-tripping or demands from my past could take that away from me. I looked down at Leo, his innocent eyes slowly drifting closed, and whispered a promise to him. "We're going to be just fine, little one. Just you and me, and all the love in the world." Life with my newborn son, Leo, was a beautiful, if sometimes exhausting, adventure. Balancing motherhood and my web design business from home was challenging, but I found joy in every little moment with him. Aunt Sarah, my late husband's aunt, would often come over to help, her presence a constant comfort in my new life as a single mom. One sunny afternoon, I decided to take Leo for a walk in his stroller. The fresh air was good for both of us, and I enjoyed these quiet moments, walking through the neighborhood. On a whim, I decided to stop by a small store to pick up some essentials. As I maneuvered the stroller through the aisles, I spotted a familiar face. It was Anna, my sister-in-law, working as a salesperson. Her mother, Mrs. Thompson, was with her, and they were deep in conversation. I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast from the last time I saw them. Their clothes were worn and plain, far from the well-kept appearance they used to maintain. They looked tired, almost defeated. I paused for a moment, wondering if I should approach them, but they saw me first. Their faces changed instantly, a mix of surprise, embarrassment, and a hint of disdain. Neither of them made a move to speak to me, and I decided it was best to leave it that way. I continued my shopping, keeping my distance. I could feel their eyes on me as I moved through the store, but I focused on Leo, who was babbling happily in his stroller. As I left the store, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The last time I had seen Anna and Mrs. Thompson, they were in a completely different position, looking down on me from their perceived higher status. Now, the tables had turned. Not that I took any pleasure in their misfortune, but it was a stark reminder of how quickly life could change. Back home, as I fed Leo and played with him, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It had been filled with ups and downs, but I had come out stronger, more resilient. I had a beautiful son, a career I was passionate about, and the support of Aunt Sarah. That evening, as I put Leo to bed, I whispered a promise to him. I'll always be here for you, my little one. We'll make our own way, no matter what life throws at us. Life has a funny way of throwing surprises at you. I'm Hannah, a 25-year-old woman who learned this lesson in the most unexpected place, a bustling coffee shop on a busy Tuesday morning. That day, my life took a turn when I crossed paths with Chris, a man who seemed to step right out of a story of everyday heroism. The coffee shop was my sanctuary, a place away from the high expectations of my wealthy family. I sat at my usual corner table, sipping a latte and scrolling through my phone, when I heard snickers behind me. It was the Johnson twins, notorious bullies from my college days. Look who's here, all alone. Daddy's little girl, sneered Mark, the taller of the two. I tried to ignore them, focusing on my phone, but they weren't done. I bet that purse costs more than our rent, added Matt, his voice dripping with mockery. Feeling my cheeks burn, I muttered under my breath, just leave me alone. That's when Chris, who until that moment was just another customer, stepped in. He was tall, with a rugged look and a confident stance. Guys, cut it out. She's not bothering you, Chris said, his voice calm but authoritative. Mark laughed mawkishly. And who are you, her knight in shining armor? Chris didn't flinch. Just a guy who hates bullies. Why don't you pick on someone who fights back? The twins looked taken aback. Matt retorted, we're just having a bit of fun, man. No need to get worked up. Chris's gaze was unwavering. It's not fun if she's not laughing. How about showing some respect? The tension was thick. The twins exchanged a glance, shrugged, and walked away, muttering insults under their breath. Chris turned to me, his face softening. Sorry about that. Some people just can't grow up. You okay? He asked, a genuine concern in his eyes. I was still processing the swift change in events. Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for stepping in. That was really brave of you. Chris just smiled and shrugged it off. I'm Chris, by the way. Couldn't just stand by and watch. I'm Hannah. You really didn't have to do that, but I'm grateful. We ended up talking more. Chris was funny, with a no-nonsense attitude and a surprisingly warm smile. He told me about his job at a local mechanic shop and his passion for fixing up old cars. It was refreshing to talk to someone so grounded and real. As our conversation flowed, I realized how easy it was to talk to him. He listened intently, laughed at my jokes, and shared stories of his own. He had this effortless charm about him that was hard to ignore. When it was time to leave, I found myself wishing the conversation didn't have to end. Chris walked me to the door, and we exchanged numbers. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. Meeting Chris felt like the beginning of something new and unexpected. It's funny how life works. One moment you're just going about your day, and the next, you meet someone who changes everything. That day in the coffee shop, I met Chris, and little did I know, my life was about to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. Meeting Chris, who had bravely stood up for me at a coffee shop, had quickly turned my life into a whirlwind romance. First came the visit to Chris's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, in their cozy suburban home. Mrs. Johnson, a petite woman with a big heart, greeted us with open arms. Chris! And this must be Hannah. We've heard so much about you. I felt a warmth in her embrace. It's really nice to meet you, Mrs. Johnson, I said, smiling. Oh, please, call me Linda, she insisted, leading us into a living room that felt lived in and welcoming. Mr. Johnson, a tall man with a firm handshake, joined us. Welcome, Hannah. We're glad Chris found someone special. The conversation over dinner was heartfelt. They asked about my life, and for the first time, I felt valued for who I was, not for my family's wealth. The real challenge, however, was introducing Chris to my parents. My father, a real estate tycoon, and my mother, a high-profile lawyer, had standards as high as skyscrapers. Their reception was polite but cold. "Dad, Mom, this is Chris." I introduced him, trying to mask my nervousness. Chris, maintaining his composure, extended a handshake. "Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, it's an honor to meet you." My dad's handshake was firm, his eyes scrutinizing. "Chris, I hear you work at a mechanic shop. Tell me, how do you plan to provide for my daughter?" Chris didn't miss a beat. "I'm saving up, sir. Planning to run my own shop someday." The dinner felt more like an interrogation, with my dad throwing sharp questions, almost challenging Chris's worth. After Chris left, my dad summoned me to his study. "Hannah, that boy isn't right for you," he said, his voice stern. He slid a folder across his desk towards me. "I've done some digging. You need to see this." Furious, I pushed the folder back without opening it. "I can't believe you'd stoop this low. I trust Chris." "Hannah, don't be a fool," he retorted, his voice rising. "This isn't just a game. It's your future." I grabbed the folder, tore it in half, and stormed out, leaving the pieces on the floor. I was fuming. How dare he pry into Chris's life and judge him without knowing him? That night, I lay in bed, my mind racing. Part of me wondered if I was too quick to dismiss my father's concerns, but my heart was steadfast. Chris was the man I loved, and no background check was going to change that. As our wedding day approached, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of requests from Chris and his parents. It all started one evening at Chris's house, a few months before the wedding. "Hannah, we were thinking," Chris started, a hint of hesitation in his voice. "Since you, well, you know, have the means, could you maybe cover the wedding expenses?" His parents, Linda and Mr. Johnson, nodded in agreement, their eyes hopeful yet a bit too eager. I was taken aback but masked my surprise with a smile. "Sure, I can do that. It's our special day, after all." As the weeks passed, their requests grew. We were at a high-end boutique, selecting wedding attire when Linda pointed at an extravagant dress. "Oh, Hannah, this is beautiful, but it's so pricey." I caught the hint. "Don't worry, Linda. If you like it, it's yours." Mr. Johnson chimed in, eyeing a suit. "Well, if we're all dressing up, might as well go all out, right?" I laughed, a bit nervously, and nodded. "Of course, Mr. Johnson." Their gratitude was short-lived and soon turned into expectation. Every meeting brought a new request. "Hannah, dear, could we add this to the menu? Or, how about a bigger flower arrangement?" I found myself agreeing each time, partly because I was in love and partly because I didn't want to disappoint them. But deep down, I felt a twinge of resentment at their growing entitlement. On the wedding day, everything was lavish, paid for from my pocket. Chris looked dashing, and his parents were beaming in their expensive outfits. My parents arrived, their expressions stiff. After the ceremony, during the reception, my father stood up to speak. The room fell silent. "Hannah has always lived a life of luxury," he began, his voice stern. "But it's time she learned the real world. As of today, she's financially cut off." A wave of whispers swept through the room. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. Chris squeezed my hand, his expression a mix of shock and worry. "Dad, you can't do this," I said, my voice trembling. "This is for your own good, Hannah. You need to learn to fend for yourself," he replied, unyielding. The rest of the evening felt surreal. Chris and his parents were unusually quiet. As we left, Chris pulled me aside. "Hannah, what are we going to do?" I forced a smile. "We'll manage, Chris. We have each other." But as we drove away, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. My father's words echoed in my ears, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that my once blissful relationship was about to face its toughest test yet. The honeymoon period didn't last long after the wedding. I quickly realized that my marriage to Chris was going to be nothing like I had imagined. The shift was abrupt and jarring. We moved into Chris's parents' house temporarily, or so I thought. The first morning, I came down to breakfast and was met with cold stares from Linda and Mr. Johnson. The air was thick with tension. "Morning," I said, trying to sound cheerful. Linda didn't look up from her coffee. "You should start looking for a job, Hannah. We can't afford to feed an extra mouth here." I was taken aback. Oh, I thought. I mean, Chris and I talked about me finding something, but I didn't expect. Mr. Johnson cut in, his tone harsh. "Well, your father cut you off, right? Time to pull your weight." I looked at Chris, hoping for some support, but he just stared at his plate. The loving, caring man I married seemed to have vanished. The following days were worse. Chris had turned cold and distant. One evening, as we were clearing the dinner table, he said, "You need to start contributing, Hannah. It's not fair to my parents." I felt a lump in my throat. "Chris, I'm trying. I didn't expect things to change this fast." He scoffed. "Welcome to the real world, Hannah. You can't always rely on Daddy's money." His words stung. I retreated to our room, feeling alone and betrayed. The man who once defended me in public was now a stranger, echoing his parents' harshness. The situation at home became increasingly difficult. Chris's parents treated me more like a burden than a family member. One afternoon, Mr. Johnson cornered me in the living room. "Hannah, you need to fix things with your father. We need that money," he demanded, his eyes cold and calculating. I stood my ground, although my voice shook. "I won't beg my father for money. I thought you welcomed me as family, not for my father's wealth." He laughed bitterly. "Family? No, we thought you were our ticket to an easy life. But you're just a spoiled brat with no sense of reality." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The loving family facade had fallen away, revealing their true motives. I was a means to an end, nothing more. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in on me. I was trapped in a house with people who saw me as nothing more than a cash cow, and the man I loved had turned into someone I didn't recognize. I missed my old life, but I was determined not to run back to my father. I had to figure this out on my own. But as the days passed, the weight of my situation grew heavier. I was stuck in a loveless marriage, with in-laws who only cared about what I could bring them financially. The harsh reality of my new life was nothing like the fairy tale I had envisioned. I was in a battle, not just for my independence, but for my dignity and self-worth. Living in Chris's parents' house, I, Hannah, was starting to feel the walls closing in on me. The atmosphere was tense, and the kindness I once saw in Chris and his family had completely vanished. Then, things started to disappear, first small items, then something big. One morning, I noticed my engagement ring wasn't on my bedside table where I usually kept it. Panicking, I searched the room, but it was nowhere to be found. "Chris, have you seen my ring?" I asked, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. He shrugged, not even looking up from his phone. "Maybe you misplaced it. It'll turn up." But it didn't. A few days later, I confronted Linda about it. "Linda, my engagement ring is missing. It's really important to me." Her response was cold, devoid of the warmth I once knew. "Maybe you should be more careful with your things, Hannah." I couldn't believe her indifference. That ring was the last symbol of the love Chris and I shared, or so I thought. Then, more items started disappearing, a pair of earrings here, a designer handbag there. It was like pieces of my old life were being erased, one item at a time. One evening, I caught Linda rummaging through my closet. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Linda turned, a pair of my shoes in her hand. "We need money, Hannah. These things are just sitting here." I was shocked. "You're selling my things? How could you? Chris walked in, overhearing the confrontation. Hannah, we're struggling here. You can't just expect to live off us. I stared at him, disbelief and hurt welling up inside me. So, you're okay with this? With your parents selling my belongings? He avoided my gaze. We have to get by somehow. I felt betrayed and alone. The people I once called family were now treating me like an ATM, disposing of my possessions without a second thought. Night after night, I lay awake, wondering how my fairy tale romance had turned into this nightmare. I was living with people who saw me as nothing more than a source of income. My love, my trust, my belongings, all were being taken from me, piece by piece. It was a harsh awakening. The life I had known, the love I had cherished, all seemed like a distant dream. I was trapped in a reality where I was nothing more than a means to an end, and my heart ached with the weight of this cruel revelation. The days at Chris's parents' house grew longer and darker for me. I was struggling to grasp the reality of my situation. I felt isolated, with my belongings disappearing and the family I married into showing their true colors. But nothing prepared me for the chilling discovery I was about to make. It was a late evening, and I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water when I overheard hushed voices from the living room. Curiosity piqued, I tiptoed closer. It was Chris, Linda, and Mr. Johnson, talking in low, urgent tones. We need to figure something out, and fast, Chris was saying, his voice laced with frustration. Linda chimed in, we're at our wits' end. Hannah's not of much use anymore, not without her father's money. I felt a chill run down my spine. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear more. Mr. Johnson's voice was gruff. We could try reaching out to her father, make up some story. Maybe a health scare, something that'll make him open his wallet. My heart pounded in my chest. Were they really plotting to extort money from my father by lying? Chris's response was even more shocking. No, he won't buy it. We need something more convincing. Maybe if something were to happen to Hannah, an accident, he'd be more inclined to help. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband, the man I loved, was suggesting putting me in harm's way to get money. Linda's voice was cold. That might work. Her father would have to pay up then. I felt sick to my stomach. Trembling, I backed away from the door, my mind racing. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a threat to my safety. The next morning, Chris found me in the kitchen, his demeanor oddly calm. Hannah, you look stressed. Everything okay? I masked my fear, opting to keep my knowledge of their plan to myself. Just a headache, I lied. Chris's eyes narrowed slightly. You know, your phone is pretty valuable. We could sell it for some extra cash. Panic surged through me, but I had to think fast. Actually, I was thinking, maybe I could call my dad. Ask him for some money. Chris's expression changed to one of interest. Really? You'd do that? I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, I'll talk to him. Just let me keep my phone for now. He eyed me for a moment, then shrugged. Fine. But make it quick. We need the money. I nodded, relief washing over me. Keeping my phone meant I had a lifeline, a way to get help. As Chris walked away, I realized the gravity of my situation. I was in a house with people who saw me as nothing more than a cash cow, willing to go to any lengths to get what they wanted. That day, I understood the true colors of the man I married and his family. They were not the loving, caring people I thought I knew. Instead, they were predators, ready to sacrifice my well-being for their gain. Trapped in a house with people plotting against me, I was gripped by fear and desperation. With my father's number dialed on my phone, I faced Chris and his parents, who insisted on being present during the call. Go on, call him. We want to hear what he says, Chris demanded, a hard edge to his voice. Mr. Johnson stood with his arms crossed, nodding in agreement. Yeah, let's see if your daddy really cares. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the call button, my hands trembling. Dad, it's Hannah, I said, trying to sound calm. Hannah, what's going on? Dad's voice was filled with concern. Remembering the code phrase he taught me as a child, I said casually, Dad, do you remember my old teddy bear, Mr. Snuggles? I really miss him. There was a brief silence on the other end. Yes, I remember. Don't worry, we'll take care of it, Dad replied, his voice now stern with a hidden urgency. Chris and his parents looked at each other, confused by our cryptic exchange. So, is he going to send the money? Chris asked, his impatience growing. I nodded, playing along. Yes, he said he'll help us. An hour passed, the longest hour of my life. Chris and his parents were smirking, confident in their deceitful plan. But their smug expressions turned to horror as the front door was suddenly kicked open. Men in suits, clearly my father's security, stormed in. My father was right behind them, his face a mask of fury and concern. What the hell is this? Mr. Johnson blustered, stepping forward only to be restrained by the security. Chris stood up, his face pale. Mr. Anderson, what are you doing here? My father's gaze was icy as he walked up to me. Hannah, are you all right? I nodded, fighting back tears. Yes, Dad, I'm okay, now. He turned to Chris and his parents, his voice thundering through the room. You've been threatening my daughter, trying to manipulate her? That's not going to fly. Chris tried to speak, but the security team was already handcuffing him and his parents. The realization that their plan had failed was written all over their faces. As the police arrived to take over, my father wrapped his arm around my shoulders, leading me out of the house. The place I had once entered with hope and love was now a scene of a failed extortion plot. Sitting in my father's car, driving away from that nightmare, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The danger was over, thanks to the secret code and my father's swift action. After the terrifying ordeal with Chris and his parents, I found myself sitting in a courtroom, a mix of anxiety and determination in my heart. As I sat there, waiting for the trial to begin, my father, sitting next to me, squeezed my hand. You're doing the right thing, Hannah, he whispered. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Chris, Linda, and Mr. Johnson were brought in, their faces a mixture of shame and defiance. The trial began, and it was my turn to testify. Standing there, facing the people I once called family, I felt a surge of courage. Your Honor, these people manipulated and threatened me. They planned to harm me for financial gain, I said, my voice steady. Chris's lawyer tried to discredit me. Isn't it true, Miss Anderson, that you're just a spoiled rich girl, upset over a family dispute? I held my ground. No, this is about them trying to use me. They saw me as nothing more than a cash cow. The evidence was overwhelming, especially the recording of their plot and the testimony from my father's security team. Chris and his parents sat there, heads bowed, as the reality of their actions sank in. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. For the crimes of extortion and conspiracy to commit harm, I sentenced the defendants. The judge's words were a blur as relief washed over me. Justice was being served. Chris and his parents would pay for what they did. After the trial, my father and I walked out of the courthouse. I'm sorry, Dad, for not listening to you, I said, tears in my eyes. He hugged me. It's okay, Hannah. You thought you were in love. We all make mistakes. As we walked, I realized this was more than just a trial. It was a lesson in trust, a hard-earned understanding of the world's harsh realities. I had been naive, but now I was wiser, stronger. My father's car pulled up, and before I got in, I looked back at the courthouse. This chapter of my life was closed, but a new one was beginning. A chapter where I would be more cautious, more aware of people's true intentions. My name's Linda, and if you told me a few years back that I'd be juggling a baby, a remote editing job, and a crumbling marriage, I'd have laughed in your face. But here I am, 33 and barely keeping my head above water. It all started when I was assigned to edit a book by Alex Chambers, a writer who was the talk of the town back then. I remember our first call. His voice, deep and a bit rough, came through the line, "Linda, Alex Chambers. Got your notes? Let's talk shop." I was professional, of course. "Sure, Alex. Chapter 3, the pacing feels off. And the character of John, he needs more depth." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Straight to the point, huh? I like that." That was our routine. Long calls, discussing his book, characters coming alive between us. Then one day, he threw me a curveball. "Your voice, Linda, it's, I don't know, calming. Fancy meeting over coffee? Talk about the book face to face?" I was taken aback, but curious. Sure, why not? So we met, and things clicked in a way I didn't expect. Fast forward through a whirlwind romance, and I found myself married to Alex Chambers, with a little girl, Lily, to complete the picture. Life was a dream, at first. Alex was charming, attentive. But when Lily came, and I switched to working from home, things started to shift. It started small. Alex, usually brimming with ideas, hit a dry spell. One night, as I was putting Lily to bed, I heard him cursing at his laptop. "Nothing. Not a damn word comes to mind," he shouted. I peeked into his office. "Hey, what's wrong?" He spun around, his face a mix of frustration and despair. "This book, Linda. It's like pulling teeth. I can't get the words out." Without thinking, I sat down next to him. "Let me take a look." That night, I ended up rewriting half of chapter 4. Alex read it, his eyes widening. This is good, Linda. Really good." A spark of pride flickered in me. But it was soon overshadowed by a new routine. I found myself spending nights at the desk, transforming Alex's jumbled thoughts into coherent chapters. He'd hover over my shoulder, nodding and occasionally mumbling, "Yeah, that's good." One evening, as I wrapped up a chapter, Alex leaned in and kissed my forehead. "Couldn't do this without you, babe." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I was tired, worn out from balancing my work, Lily, and now, Alex's book. I felt like I was losing myself in the process. As weeks turned into months, my role as the secret backbone of Alex's writing solidified. I was the one breathing life into his characters, crafting the twists and turns of his plots. But outside our home office, I was just Linda, Alex's wife. One day, as I was tidying up the living room, Alex walked in, phone in hand. "Hey, Linda, my publisher loved the latest chapter. They think it's some of my best work." I forced a smile. "That's great, Alex." He didn't notice the strain in my voice. "Yeah, I told them I've been working hard on it." I bit back a sharp retort. "Working hard?" It was my words, my nights spent agonizing over every sentence. As Alex's book neared completion, my resentment grew. I was the muse he never acknowledged, the ghost in his success story. I remember confronting him about it one night. "Alex, don't you think I deserve some credit? I've practically written half the book." He looked up, surprised. "What? Linda, come on. It's my name on the cover. That's how it works." I stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. "So, my work, my words, they mean nothing?" Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're helping me, Linda. That's what partners do. But it's my book, my career." I walked out of the room, my heart heavy. It was clear to me then. In Alex's story, I was just a footnote, a nameless contributor. And that hurt more than I could say. The night the book was published, I held a copy in my hands. Flipping through the pages, my words stared back at me, hiding behind Alex's name. There was no mention of me in the acknowledgements, not even a subtle hint. I confronted Alex about it, my voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "You didn't even mention me. Not once." He shrugged, oblivious to my hurt. It's just how it is, Linda. I'm the writer, you're the editor. We each have our roles. That was the moment I realized how invisible I'd become in Alex's world. It was a bitter pill to swallow, a harsh truth I had to face. My life turned into a pressure cooker about to blow. Juggling work, Lily, the house, and Alex's demands had me stretched thinner than a dollar store rubber band. One typical Tuesday, I was knee-deep in laundry when Alex barged in, his face buried in his phone. "Linda, where's my blue shirt? The one I wore at last week's reading?" I pointed to the ironing board without looking up. "It's right there, Alex. Ironed it this morning." He grabbed the shirt and mumbled a half-hearted, "Thanks," already distracted by another text. I shook my head, feeling like part of the furniture. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat down to edit a manuscript for work. My eyes were heavy, my brain fried. Alex strolled in, a sheaf of papers in his hand. "Hey, can you look at these? I need your magic touch." I glanced at the clock. It was already past 10. "Alex, it's late, and I've got a pile of editing for work." He frowned, his voice rising. "But this is important, Linda. My publisher's waiting." I sighed, taking the papers. "Fine, but this is the last time, Alex. I can't keep doing this." He scoffed. "What's the big deal? You're just sitting at home all day." I snapped. "Just sitting at home? Really, Alex? Between Lily, the house, and your never-ending book needs, I barely have time to breathe." Alex rolled his eyes. "Dramatic much? I'm the one with the real job here." That stung. "Real job? I'm an editor, Alex, not your personal assistant." He shrugged, clearly not getting it. "Whatever, just do what you can." I worked on his manuscript, resentment boiling inside me. Each word I edited felt like a betrayal to my own work. The next day, as I was fixing lunch, Alex waltzed in, phone in hand again. "Linda, I need you to draft some emails to my publisher. And book my flight to New York next week." I slammed the knife down on the counter. "Do it yourself, Alex. I'm not your secretary." He looked taken aback. "What's gotten into you?" I exploded. "I'm tired, Alex. Tired of being your invisible helper, tired of putting my life on hold." He tried to interrupt, but I plowed on. "No, let me finish. I'm also a person, with dreams and a career. But you just take and never give a damn." Alex's face hardened. "Fine, do what you want. I don't need your help." I watched him storm out, feeling a mix of relief and dread. But as I stood in the silent kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot harder. The day I uncovered Alex's infidelity felt like any other, until I stumbled upon something that turned my world upside down. I was sorting through our joint bank statements when I noticed a peculiar charge. Alex had booked a hotel room, supposedly for a fan meetup. But it wasn't a single room like usual, this time, it was a double. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. A double room? Why would he need that? The question echoed in my mind, but deep down, I feared I already knew the answer. I decided to confront him when he got back. He walked through the door that evening, looking weary but satisfied. "Hey, Linda, back from the event. It was great," he said, trying to kiss me. I dodged his kiss and held up the bank statement. "Why'd you book a double room, Alex?" He glanced at the statement, his face momentarily blank. "Oh, that? Must be a mistake. I booked a single, like always." I wanted to believe him, but the doubt had already seated itself. "A mistake, huh? Okay." Later that night, after Alex came home drunk, he crashed into bed, leaving his phone carelessly on the nightstand. A voice inside me whispered to check it. I hesitated, but curiosity and suspicion won. Picking up his phone, I felt like a detective in a bad movie, but what I found was no fiction. His messages were a maze of lies and deceit. There it was, a string of texts with someone named Julia. They weren't just friendly, they were intimate, full of plans and secrets. I scrolled through their conversations, each message a stab to my heart. Alex's words about me were the worst, calling me a fool, saying he only kept me around as a servant. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept going, screenshotting everything. Then I found the photos, Alex and Julia, together in ways that left no room for doubt. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, horrifying, but impossible to look away. I transferred all the evidence to my laptop, a heavy knot forming in my stomach. This was more than a hunch now, it was cold, hard proof of his betrayal. The next day, I acted like everything was normal. Alex, clueless and hungover, didn't suspect a thing. "Morning, Linda. What's for breakfast?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "Just cereal," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside. As he sat eating, oblivious, I studied him. This was the man I married, the father of my child, living a double life right under my nose. Anger and hurt welled up inside me, but I pushed them down. I needed to be smart, to plan my next move carefully. That day, as I went about my chores and work, part of me was elsewhere, plotting, planning. Alex's betrayal had shattered something fundamental between us. But I wasn't going to let him see me break. Not yet. I had to be strategic, to hit him where it hurt most. And for that, I needed to keep my discovery a secret, for now. It was a regular evening, Alex was lounging in his chair, absorbed in his laptop. Lily had just fallen asleep, and the house was quiet. The perfect setting for a confrontation. I approached him hesitantly. "Alex, can we talk? It's important." He barely glanced up. "Sure, what's up?" I took a deep breath, my phone recording in my pocket. "I'm burned out, Alex. Writing your books, managing the house, taking care of Lily. I can't do it anymore." His fingers stopped typing. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean you can't do it? You know how important this is to me." I persisted, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. "It's too much. I have my own work, and Lily needs more of my time. I can't write your books for you anymore." Alex's face reddened. "You can't just quit, Linda. My career depends on those books. You're supposed to support me, not bail out." I tried to sound as reasonable as possible. "Support goes both ways, Alex. I need your understanding now." He scoffed. "Understanding? I've given you a comfortable life, a home, and this is how you repay me? By backing out when I need you the most." His words stung, but I needed him to admit the full extent of my role. "I've been doing more than backing you up, Alex. I've been writing your books, and it's taking a toll on me." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're just the editor, Linda. Let's not overstate your role here." I felt my patience waning. "Just the editor? Alex, who do you think has been coming up with the plots, the dialogues, refining the characters?" "It's been me." His voice rose in anger. "So what? My name is on those books. Without me, they'd be nothing. You're nothing without me." I edged closer, ensuring my phone caught every word. "Are you saying you'd be nothing without my writing?" He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Of course not. I'm the author, but you quitting now is like a betrayal. You can't leave me hanging. If you stop writing for me, I'll make sure you regret it." I asked, baiting him further. "Is that a threat, Alex?" He leaned in, his face inches from mine. "Yes, it's a threat. You're my wife, Linda. You do what's needed for this family, for my career. If you think you can just walk away from this, think again. I'll divorce you and make sure you get nothing." I stepped back, my heart pounding. I had what I needed. "Okay, Alex. We'll see about that." He stormed off to his office, slamming the door behind him. Alone, I took out my phone and ended the recording. Listening back, his words were damning, an unequivocal admission of his dependence on me, mixed with threats and arrogance. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The man I once loved had turned into a stranger, one who saw me as nothing more than a tool for his success. But now, with this recording, the tables were turned. I had the power to expose him, to tear down the facade he'd so carefully built. My mind raced with possibilities. I could take this to his publisher, the media, or use it in a legal battle. Whatever path I chose, one thing was clear: our marriage was over, and it was time for Alex to face the consequences of his actions. The day of Alex's big press conference was my chosen moment for revelation. Clutching the recording of his admission, my plan was set in motion. Alex was oblivious, caught up in his usual pre-event frenzy. "Linda, make sure the presentation is spot on. This is huge for me," he stressed, pacing around the living room. I nodded, hiding my nerves behind a calm facade. "I've got it under control, Alex." Little did he know, the presentation I had prepared was a far cry from his expectations. I had embedded not just the transcript of our conversation, but also the audio recording, ready to expose his duplicity to the world. The conference day arrived. I was a bundle of nerves and determination, watching as Alex took the stage with his usual flair. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Today, I'll give you an insight into my creative process." As the first slide flashed up, Alex's confident smile wavered. The room fell into a stunned silence as his own words appeared on the screen, followed by his voice echoing through the speakers, confessing his reliance on me for his books. The shock in the room was palpable. Alex fumbled for words. There seems to be some mistake." But the damage was done. The crowd was in an uproar, murmurs and gasps filling the air, while cameras clicked frantically, capturing every moment of his unraveling facade. The aftermath of the press conference was like a hurricane tearing through our lives. Alex, once the master of his domain, was now caught in the eye of the storm he had created. His fury when he returned home was palpable, a tempest of anger and disbelief. "You've completely destroyed me, Linda. My career, my reputation. How could you?" he raged, his voice echoing through the halls of our once peaceful home. I faced him, my resolve unwavering. "I'm filing for divorce, Alex. I can't be part of this lie anymore." His anger turned to desperation. "Divorce? You can't be serious. Think about Lily, think about what you're doing to our family." I sighed, a weight lifting off my shoulders. "It's over, Alex. I know about Julia too. The lies, the betrayal. It's all out now." He sank into a chair, his energy deflated. "Linda, I didn't mean for any of this." I shook my head. "It doesn't matter what you meant. It's what you did. And now, everyone knows." As his career began to crumble, with publishers distancing themselves and fans expressing their outrage, I took the opportunity to reclaim my voice. I decided to continue the book series under my own name, my work finally receiving the recognition it deserved. In the midst of this, a surprising twist came my way. Alex's mistress, a woman with considerable influence in the media, approached me discreetly. She was desperate to keep her name out of the scandal and offered a substantial sum to ensure her anonymity in court. After much contemplation, I agreed to her terms. This wasn't just about retribution, it was about securing a stable future for Lily and me. The money meant freedom and a fresh start. The day of the divorce hearing arrived, and Alex's demeanor had shifted from anger to a plea for reconciliation. "Linda, we can sort this out. We can go to counseling, start over. Please, don't do this." I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved, now a stranger consumed by his own deceit. "It's too late, Alex. I can't erase what you've done, the lies you've told. It's over." In the courtroom, the air was tense. Alex's lawyer tried to argue for leniency, but the evidence against him was undeniable. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me a significant compensation and full custody of Lily. Alex was ordered to pay child support, a final blow to his already faltering financial state. Returning home, I watched Lily playing in the living room, her laughter a balm to my soul. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, her gentle breathing was a reminder of the new beginning that lay ahead of us. "Mommy, will everything be okay?" she murmured sleepily. I kissed her forehead, whispering, "Yes, my love. Everything will be just fine. We have each other, and that's all we need." In the quiet of the night, I reflected on the tumultuous journey. The pain and betrayal had been overwhelming, but they had led me to a newfound strength and independence. It was the end of a painful chapter, but the start of something new, a future where I was the author of my own story, free to write the next chapters as I saw fit. In the wake of our divorce, life settled into a new rhythm. I focused on raising Lily and my burgeoning writing career, now rightfully acknowledged under my name. Alex's presence in our lives dwindled, his visits with Lily becoming infrequent and strained. One afternoon, while Lily was at school, I sat at my desk, working on my latest book. The phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Alex, his voice barely a whisper. "Linda, I've messed up," he said, a tremor in his voice. "What happened, Alex?" I asked, my tone guarded. He sighed heavily. "I published a book about my affair. I was desperate, Linda. I thought it might save my career. But I named Julia in it." I was stunned. "You named her? After everything?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, and now she's suing me. She won the case. I have to pay her $1 million, Linda. I'm ruined." I shook my head, disbelief and a twinge of pity mingling inside me. "Alex, why would you do that? You knew the consequences." "I don't know, Linda. I don't know what I thought." I ended the call, feeling a mix of emotions. It was a stark reminder of how far Alex had fallen, a victim of his own hubris and poor choices. Weeks passed, and the news of Alex's latest fiasco spread. His already tarnished reputation took another hit. Meanwhile, my own career flourished. My books, once hidden behind Alex's name, were now celebrated for their authentic voice and compelling storytelling. One day, as I picked Lily up from school, her teacher, Ms. Adams, approached me. "Linda, I just wanted to say, I've been reading your books. They're incredible. You're so talented." I smiled, a sense of pride swelling in my chest. "Thank you, Ms. Adams. That means a lot." As Lily and I walked home, hand in hand, she looked up at me with her bright, curious eyes. "Mommy, are you happy now?" I squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, Lily, I am. Very happy." It was true. Despite the tumultuous journey, I had found my voice, my independence. I was no longer overshadowed by Alex's deceit. That evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, her soft voice broke the silence. "Mommy, will Daddy be okay?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Daddy made some mistakes, sweetheart. But he'll learn from them, hopefully." She nodded, her eyes slowly closing. "I love you, Mommy." "I love you too, Lily. More than anything." As I turned off the light, I realized that this was not just the end of a painful chapter, but the beginning of a new one. A chapter filled with hope, strength, and the unwavering love between a mother and her daughter. In the quiet of the night, I reflected on the journey. Karma had played its hand, and in its wake, left a path for new beginnings. I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined. My story, once hidden behind the shadow of another, was now mine to write, and I embraced it with open arms.
I always felt a flutter of nerves whenever we visited David's family. It wasn't that they weren't welcoming, far from it. David's parents, Martha and George, were the epitome of warmth, and his brother Mike could always be counted on for a good laugh. But then there was Laura, Mike's wife, the proverbial thorn in my side. As David and I drove to his parents' house for the usual Sunday dinner, I couldn't help but voice my concerns. David, are you sure it's okay that I come along today? I don't want to create any tension, especially with Laura around. David glanced at me, his eyes softening. Chloe, your family. They all adore you. As for Laura, just try to ignore her snide remarks, okay? I nodded, trying to brush aside the unease. David parked the car, and we made our way to the front door, greeted by the familiar, comforting aroma of roast beef and homemade apple pie. As we entered, Martha's face lit up. Chloe, David, you're here. Come in, come in. George followed suit, his hearty laugh filling the room as he enveloped us in bear hugs. How's my favorite daughter-in-law and soon-to-be lawyer? Before I could reply, Mike bounded over, his usual playful self. Hey, sis, ready for another round of family madness? I laughed, the tension easing a bit. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Then, from the living room, Laura's voice cut through the air, tinged with her typical mix of indifference and sarcasm. Oh, look, the happy couple finally graces us with their presence. I forced a smile, meeting her gaze. Hi, Laura, good to see you too. Dinner was served, and the conversation flowed easily at first, everyone catching up on the week's events. Laura, however, seemed to be in a particularly prickly mood. So, Chloe, still trying to play house with David? I mean, with your career and all, isn't that a bit too traditional for you? She asked, a smirk playing on her lips. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent gesture of support. I took a deep breath. Well, Laura, we all make choices that suit us best. I believe in balancing career and family. Laura snorted. Balancing, right. As if having kids doesn't totally derail your life. Mike, trying to diffuse the tension, chimed in with a chuckle. Oh, come on, Laura, a little niece or nephew would be a joy, wouldn't it? Laura rolled her eyes dramatically. Joy? More like a lifetime of hassle. But hey, if Chloe wants to pop out a few kids and live the suburban dream, who am I to judge? I could feel the temperature in the room drop a few degrees. George, ever the peacemaker, attempted to steer the conversation elsewhere. So, David, how's that new project going at work? You were telling me about it last week. David launched into a description of his latest venture, but I could barely focus. Laura's comments had struck a nerve, and I spent the rest of the meal in a daze. It was a cool autumn evening, and the family had gathered at Martha and George's for dinner. This time, the air was filled with an extra buzz of excitement. David and I had a special announcement to make, and I was both nervous and thrilled. As we sat around the dinner table laden with Martha's famous pot roast and mashed potatoes, I exchanged a glance with David. He gave me an encouraging nod. It was now or never. Everyone, we have some news. I began, my voice slightly trembling. All eyes turned to us. Martha leaned forward, her expression expectant. What is it, dear? David took my hand, beaming. We're expecting a baby. There was a moment of stunned silence, then the room erupted in cheers and congratulations. Martha and George were beaming. Oh, my goodness! That's wonderful news. Martha exclaimed, getting up to hug us. George clapped David on the back. Congratulations, son. I'm so proud of you both. Mike hooped, his grin wide. I'm going to be an uncle. That's awesome. Amidst the joy and excitement, Laura sat back, a smirk playing on her lips. A baby, huh? Well, that's going to be a handful. Good luck with that. Her tone was laced with condescension, but I tried not to let it bother me. I was too happy. Martha frowned at Laura's comment. Laura, dear, it's a joyous occasion. Laura shrugged, nonchalantly picking at her food. Sure, joyous. Until the sleepless nights and diaper changes kick in. Mike, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood. Oh, Laura, don't be such a pessimist. It's going to be great, right, Chloe? I smiled, determined to keep the atmosphere positive. Absolutely, Mike. We're really excited. The conversation eventually moved on, but Laura's words lingered in my mind. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension amidst my happiness. As the evening wound down, George raised his glass for a toast. To David and Chloe, and the new addition to our family. Glasses clinked, and everyone echoed, to David and Chloe. These words warmed my heart. Despite Laura's attitude, our joy couldn't be dampened. This was the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, and nothing was going to take that away from us. The excitement of our announcement soon gave way to the harsh realities of pregnancy. My mornings, afternoons, and evenings became a nauseating roller coaster. I could hardly keep anything down, and even the smell of my once favorite foods made my stomach churn. During one of these tough days, David and I were at his parents' for dinner again. I was trying to nibble on some toast, my only safe food these days. David was rubbing my back, trying to comfort me. Chloe, you sure you don't want to try some soup? Mom made it just how you like it, David suggested gently. I shook my head weakly. No, thanks, David. Just the smell is making me queasy. Martha looked at me with concern. Poor dear, this pregnancy seems to be really taking a toll on you. Laura, who had been watching with a disinterested look, chimed in with her usual lack of empathy. Well, what did you expect, Chloe? Pregnancy isn't a walk in the park. You wanted a baby, so now deal with it. I clenched my jaw, trying to maintain my composure. David's expression hardened. Laura, that's enough. Can't you see she's struggling? Laura rolled her eyes. Oh please, David. I'm just stating the facts. She should have thought about this before. George, trying to defuse the situation, interjected. Laura, let's keep the dinner pleasant, please. Mike, who had been silent, finally spoke up, his tone a mix of annoyance and concern. Laura, can't you just lay off for once? Chloe's doing her best. Laura scoffed, pushing her chair back. I'm just being realistic. You all are just babying her. In my opinion, she's just overreacting. It's just a little morning sickness. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, the stress and hormones getting the better of me. David stood up, his chair scraping back loudly. That's it. We're leaving. Chloe doesn't need this right now. As David helped me up, Martha came over, her eyes filled with apology. I'm so sorry, Chloe. Don't mind Laura, dear. We said our goodbyes quickly, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness as we left. The car ride home was quiet, the tension from dinner lingering in the air. As we drove home, I couldn't shake off Laura's words. They echoed in my mind, amplifying my fears and insecurities. But deep down, I knew I had to stay strong, for the sake of our baby. The day finally arrived when David and I welcomed our son, Ethan, into the world. It was a moment of pure joy, overshadowing all the hardships of the past months. We decided to introduce Ethan to the family at Martha and George's place, a neutral ground where everyone could share our happiness. As we entered the house, Ethan cradled in my arms, the family's reactions were everything I hoped for. Martha's eyes lit up, and George's broad smile was like a beacon of warmth. Mike was practically bouncing with excitement. Oh, my stars, he's just perfect. Martha cooed, gently touching Ethan's tiny hand. George leaned in, his voice gentle. Welcome to the world, little fella. Mike was next, his voice full of awe. Hey there, little guy, I'm your Uncle Mike. Ready to cause some trouble together? Their reactions filled my heart to the brim. But then, there was Laura. She hung back, a sour expression on her face. When she finally approached, her words were like a cold splash of water. Well, that's a baby, all right. Kinda looks a bit weird, though. all red and wrinkly. The room went silent. Martha's face turned into a frown, and George's eyes narrowed. David's arm instinctively tightened around me. "Excuse me?" Martha said, her tone icy. "What did you just say about my grandson?" Laura shrugged, her voice dripping with disdain. "I'm just saying, he's not exactly cute, is he? Looks kind of scary to me." I felt a sting at her words, and David stepped in, his voice tight. "That's enough, Laura. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all." Mike looked at Laura, disbelief written all over his face. "Laura, what's wrong with you? That's your nephew." Laura rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Everyone's thinking it, I'm just the only one saying it." Martha stepped closer to Laura, her eyes flashing. "Your behavior is disgusting, Laura. If you can't be happy for Chloe and David, maybe you should leave." Laura scoffed, crossing her arms. "Fine. If I'm not welcome, then I'll go. But don't expect me to fawn over a baby like everyone else." With that, she stormed out of the house, leaving a trail of shock and discomfort behind her. The joyous atmosphere had been tainted, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. A few months had passed since Ethan's introduction to the family, and things had been relatively calm. David and I were adjusting to parenthood, albeit with the usual sleepless nights and endless diaper changes. That sense of normalcy was shattered one afternoon when Laura unexpectedly showed up at our doorstep. I opened the door to find her standing there, an odd, frantic look in her eyes. "Laura, what are you doing here?" I asked, surprised. "Chloe, I need a favor, a big one," she blurted out, her voice tinged with desperation. I was wary but curious. "Okay, what is it?" She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around. "I need to borrow Ethan. Just for a little while." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Borrow Ethan? What on earth for?" She began pacing, speaking rapidly. "It's my grandmother, see? She's old, doesn't have much time left. She told me she's leaving most of her estate to the first grandchild who has a baby. I thought maybe I could pass Ethan off as mine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want to pretend my son is yours? Are you insane?" Laura stopped pacing, turning to face me. "It's just for a day, Chloe. My grandmother's not all there anymore. She won't know the difference." Anger bubbled up inside me. "You want to deceive your dying grandmother with my child? That's sick, Laura." She clenched her fists, her voice rising. "You don't understand, Chloe. This could change my life. It's a lot of money we're talking about." I shook my head, disbelief and anger mingling. "I don't care how much money it is. I'm not going to help you lie, especially not with my baby." Laura's face contorted with frustration. "You're being selfish, Chloe. You have no idea what I'm going through." I stood my ground, my voice firm. "And you have no idea what being a mother means." "The answer is no, Laura. Now, I think you should leave." She glared at me, her body tense. "You're going to regret this, Chloe. You just wait and see." With that, Laura stormed off, leaving me standing there, shocked and shaking. I closed the door slowly, my mind racing. The audacity of her request was beyond comprehension. I knew then that Laura was capable of going to extreme lengths for her own benefit, and that realization chilled me to the bone. I called David immediately, recounting the bizarre encounter. He was just as shocked and angry as I was. "She's lost it, Chloe. Just stay away from her, okay? I don't want her anywhere near you or Ethan." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I will. It's too much." After hanging up, I went to check on Ethan, sleeping peacefully in his crib, blissfully unaware of the insanity of the world around him. I promised myself then and there that I would protect him from any harm, no matter what. Laura's bizarre request had opened my eyes to the lengths she would go to, and I knew I had to be vigilant. It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon, and Ethan was taking his nap in his nursery upstairs. I was in the kitchen, trying to catch up on some chores, when the doorbell rang. It was a courier with a delivery of baby supplies I had ordered online. The exchange took less than a minute. But when I returned inside and headed upstairs to check on Ethan, my heart dropped to my stomach. The crib was empty. Ethan was gone. Panic surged through me. "Ethan! Ethan!" I called out, my voice trembling as I frantically searched the room. There was no response, no sign of him anywhere. My mind raced with horrifying possibilities. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed David's number. "David, Ethan's gone. He's not in his crib, he's not anywhere." I cried out as soon as he answered. "What? What do you mean gone? Are you sure he's not somewhere in the house?" David's voice was laced with panic. "I've looked everywhere. He's not here, David. Someone took him." I was on the verge of hysteria. David's voice was firm, trying to stay calm for both of us. "Okay, Chloe, call the police right now. I'm leaving the office, I'll be there as soon as I can." I hung up and dialed 911, my voice breaking as I explained the situation to the operator. Within minutes, police cars arrived, their sirens piercing the quiet neighborhood. As the officers began their investigation, David rushed in, his face pale with fear. "Chloe, tell me everything. What happened?" I recounted the events, from the courier's visit to the chilling discovery of Ethan's empty crib. As I spoke, a horrible thought struck me. Laura, she threatened me, after I refused to let her take Ethan. David's face hardened. "I'll kill her if she's done anything to him." The police overheard and immediately took note. "We need to know everything about this Laura. Address, description, everything," one of the officers said. As we provided Laura's details, Martha and George arrived, faces etched with worry. Martha embraced me, her own tears mingling with mine. Just then, Mike burst through the door, his eyes wild with worry. "What's going on? I heard Ethan's missing." Before we could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went white. "It's Laura." He answered, his voice shaking. "Laura, where are you? Do you know anything about Ethan?" The room fell silent, everyone's eyes on Mike. He listened for a moment, his expression turning from worry to shock and then to anger. "You did what? Laura, how could you?" He hung up, his body trembling with rage. "She took him. She's at her grandmother's, trying to pass Ethan off as her own." The police officer sprang into action, coordinating with their team to track Laura down. David held me close, his body rigid with anger and fear. David, Mike, and I were in a state of high alert as we drove to Laura's grandmother's house. The tension in the car was palpable, each of us lost in our own turmoil of anger and worry. As we approached the house, my heart pounded against my chest, a mix of fear and desperate hope. Mike was on his phone, coordinating with the police. "They're on their way. We just need to keep her there until they arrive." We pulled up to the house, and without a second thought, we rushed inside. The scene that greeted us was surreal. Laura was there, holding Ethan in her arms, cooing at him as if he were her own. Her grandmother, a frail, confused-looking woman, was watching them with a faint smile. The moment Laura saw us, her face went white. "What are you doing here?" she stammered, clutching Ethan closer. "Give me my son, Laura," I shouted, my voice filled with a mixture of rage and relief at seeing Ethan. David was right beside me, his eyes fixed on Ethan. "You're done, Laura. The police are on their way." Laura's grandmother looked around, confusion written all over her face. What's going on? Laura, who are these people? Before Laura could respond, Mike stepped forward, his voice filled with disgust. These are Ethan's real parents, Grandma. Laura took him, pretending he was hers. The old woman's eyes widened in shock. What? Laura, is this true? Laura's facade finally crumbled. Tears started streaming down her face. I just wanted the inheritance, Grandma. I didn't think it would go this far. Her grandmother shook her head, disappointment etched on her face. Laura, how could you? This is unforgivable. By now, Ethan had started to fuss, sensing the tension. I reached out, and Laura, defeated, handed him over to me. Holding Ethan close, feeling his warmth and hearing his familiar sounds, was the most comforting feeling in the world after the terror of the last few hours. You're sick, Laura, David said, his voice cold. You need help. Laura was sobbing now, her body shaking. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Just then, the police arrived, their presence filling the room. They immediately went to Laura, reading her rights as they handcuffed her. As we left Laura's grandmother's house, the police leading Laura away, a wave of relief washed over me. Ethan was safe in my arms, unharmed by the ordeal. In the weeks that followed, our lives were a whirlwind of police statements and court dates. The reality of what Laura had done was sinking in, not just for us, but for the entire family. David and I were sitting in the living room one evening after putting Ethan to bed, the silence between us filled with unspoken thoughts. David finally broke the silence. Chloe, I can't believe she's actually going to jail for this. I nodded, still processing everything. I know. It's just. I feel so betrayed, David. She was family. David reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. She crossed a line, Chloe. What she did was unforgivable. But we need to focus on moving forward, for Ethan's sake. The trial had been swift. Laura's actions were indefensible, and she was sentenced to several years in prison for kidnapping. Mike had filed for divorce, a decision that had shaken him deeply. A few days later, we were at Martha and George's house. The family had gathered, a sense of somber unity in the air. Martha was the first to speak as we all sat in the living room. I just can't believe she would do something like this. To her own family, she said, her voice heavy with sadness. George nodded, his brow furrowed. It's a hard pill to swallow. But we have to think about the kids now, about Ethan. Mike sat quietly, his eyes distant. I feel like I didn't know her at all. How could I have been so blind? David put a hand on his brother's shoulder. You couldn't have known, Mike. None of us could. The conversation turned to how we could all support each other. It was clear that the family bond had been tested, but not broken. In the months that followed, life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. Ethan was growing fast, his smiles and laughter a constant reminder of the joy he brought into our lives. The ordeal with Laura had left its mark, but it had also made us stronger, more appreciative of the love and support we had for each other. One evening, as I watched Ethan play, I realized that this experience had taught me about the resilience of family, the strength of love, and the power of moving forward, no matter how difficult the past might have been. We had faced our darkest hour, but we had emerged stronger, united by our love for each other and for our son. The future was uncertain, but I knew that as long as we were together, we could face anything. In our cozy little home, life often felt like a well-orchestrated symphony, each day flowing into the next with a comforting regularity. I'm Eliza, a dedicated dentist whose life revolves around caring for others, both in my clinic and at home. My husband, Tom, a man whose past life had etched lines of worry and contemplation on his face, was often my partner in quiet evenings spent discussing everything and nothing. This particular evening, however, held a different tune. As I entered our home, the aroma of simmering stew greeted me, a sign of Tom's attempt to provide some culinary comfort. I found him in the kitchen, looking more troubled than usual. "Hey love, what's cooking?" I asked, trying to inject some lightness into the heavy air. Tom glanced up, managing a weak smile. "Just some stew." "Eliza, we need to talk about something important." "It's about Alex." Alex, Tom's son from his previous marriage, lived with his mother in a different city. Our interactions were limited to brief, somewhat formal exchanges on Skype, his shy demeanor never allowing me to know him beyond the basic pleasantries. "What about Alex? Is he okay?" I queried, concern lacing my voice as I took a seat at the kitchen table. Tom joined me, his hands clasped together, the weight of his words gathering like storm clouds. "He's fine, health-wise. But he's been given a chance to follow his dream of forming a band. He's really passionate about it, Eliza. But, well, he needs our financial help." I leaned in, listening intently. "How much does he need?" I asked, my mind already sifting through our finances. Tom hesitated, then uttered, "Around $10,000. It's for the equipment, some studio time, things like that." I took a deep breath, the number settling in my mind. "That's a significant amount, Tom. But if it's for his dream, tell me, have you seen any of his work? Is he serious about this path?" He nodded vigorously. "I've heard some of his music during our calls. He spends every spare moment he has on it. I believe in him, Eliza." I watched the earnest look in his eyes, a father's love mingling with hope. "All right, Tom. If you believe this is right, I trust your judgment. Let's support Alex. But, let's also ensure it's a wise decision. We should probably have a chat with him, understand his plan a little better." Tom's face lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Eliza. This means the world to him, and to me. And yes, let's arrange a call with him soon." As we sat there planning our next steps, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I was about to invest in a dream, in a young man I barely knew, hoping that our contribution would set him on a path to success and fulfillment. It was a risk, but perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, a risk worth taking for family. Months slipped by after the first financial aid for Tom's son, Alex. Life resumed its usual pace with my dental practice bustling and Tom's work steady. Then one evening, as autumn leaves began to paint the ground in hues of amber and gold, Tom approached me with a familiar hesitancy in his eyes. "Eliza, can we talk about something?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge of discomfort. I nodded, setting aside the book I was reading. "Of course, what's on your mind?" He took a deep breath, his gaze avoiding mine. "It's about Alex again. He's making great progress with his music, really diving into it. But he needs more support, another $10,000. I felt a twinge of surprise, my eyebrows knitting together in concern. "Another $10,000? But we just provided for his initial setup. What does he need this time?" Tom's fingers fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. "He's looking to upgrade some equipment, maybe get into a better studio. It's just that, things are getting more serious for him now." I sighed, a sense of unease settling in. "Tom, I understand wanting to support Alex, but we need to be mindful. We're talking about a lot of money here. I earn well, but these are hard-earned savings. We need to think about our future too." Tom's face turned a shade darker, his voice raising slightly. "But it's for Alex, Eliza. My son. Don't you think he deserves this chance?" His tone stung, a hint of accusation lingering in the air. "Of course, I do," I replied, my voice firm yet calm. "But I also believe in responsible support. We can't just keep handing out money without understanding the full picture." The conversation grew heated, our words a volley of concern and frustration. Then, suddenly, Tom's demeanor shifted from defensive to outright angry. "You just don't understand, Eliza. You're not a parent. You don't know what it's like to want to give everything to your child." His words cut deep, echoing around the room. I recoiled, hurt flashing in my eyes. "Tom, that's unfair. I've been nothing but supportive. But we can't be reckless. And your son is almost an adult, he needs to learn financial responsibility too." Tom shook his head, his anger boiling over. "You're just being selfish and greedy, Eliza. You don't understand what family means." With that, he stormed out of the house, leaving me in a stunned silence. His accusations felt like a slap, the word greedy reverberating in my mind. I sat there, trying to piece together the fragments of our conversation, the harmony of our life now disturbed by a growing discord. Days turned into a week, and Tom's absence stretched on. I was left to ponder the situation alone, my concern for Alex's future wrestling with my dismay at Tom's reaction. When Tom finally returned, his demeanor had softened, but the underlying issue remained unresolved. "I'm sorry, Eliza," he said, his voice low. "I shouldn't have exploded like that. It's just, I want to do right by Alex." I nodded, accepting his apology but feeling the distance between us. "I understand, Tom. But we need to be a team in this, especially when it comes to big decisions." Reluctantly, I agreed to the additional support for Alex, my heart heavy with apprehension. Tom's immediate switch back to his affectionate self was a relief, but also a reminder of the fragile balance we were treading. The cycle of financial requests for Tom's son had become a recurring theme, straining not just our bank account, but also the very fabric of our relationship. Just as the leaves began to shift to the fiery colors of fall, Tom approached me again, his demeanor more desperate than before. "Eliza, we need to talk about Alex again," he began, avoiding my gaze. I set down my book, a sense of dread filling the air. "What is it this time, Tom?" He fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable. "It's a big opportunity for him, a chance to go on a tour with his band. He needs our help, Eliza. He needs $30,000. I was taken aback, the figure echoing in my mind like a bad joke. $30,000? Tom, this is getting out of hand. We've been supportive, but this is too much." Tom's face flushed with frustration. "But it's for his future, Eliza. Can't you see? He could make it big." I stood up, feeling the tension like a physical force between us. "And I want to support him, but not blindly. We've never even seen him play. We don't know if this band is real or just a whim. We need some kind of proof, Tom." His voice raised, a note of panic creeping in. "Why can't you just trust me, Eliza? Why do you need proof for everything?" I replied, my own voice rising in response. "Because trust is based on honesty and responsibility, Tom. And right now, I'm not seeing a lot of either." The room was thick with unsaid words and mounting frustrations. Tom then dropped a bombshell that shattered any semblance of normalcy. "If you don't give this money for Alex, I don't think I can stay in this marriage." I felt as if the floor had fallen out beneath me. "Are you blackmailing me, Tom? Using our marriage as a bargaining chip for money?" He didn't answer, his silence speaking volumes. I realized then that our issues ran deeper than I had ever imagined. This was about more than money, it was about respect, trust, and the balance of power in our relationship. "I need time to think," I said finally, my voice hollow. "This isn't something I can decide right now." Tom stormed out, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. I knew something had to change. We couldn't continue down this path of ultimatums and financial demands. That night, as I lay in bed, the space beside me cold and empty, I realized that I was at a crossroads. One path led to giving in to Tom's demands, sacrificing my principles and possibly my financial security. The other was fraught with the unknown, potentially leading to the end of my marriage. In the quiet of our home, I sat down with my laptop, a sense of unease stirring within me as I navigated to Alex's Instagram page. The images that greeted me were far from what I expected of a struggling musician. Lavish parties, designer clothes, exotic locations, it all painted a picture of luxury that belied the story we'd been told. I needed answers directly from Alex. I called him on Skype, ensuring the video recording was on, ready to confront him about the inconsistencies. He answered, his face a mask of casual indifference. "Alex, we need to talk about the money your dad and I have been sending you," I began, my tone firm. He shrugged nonchalantly. "What about it?" I didn't mince words. "I've seen your Instagram. Your lifestyle doesn't match up with needing money for a band. I'm not sending any more money." His face changed then, the cool facade slipping into something darker. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections, people that can make life very unpleasant for you." I felt a chill at his threat, but I didn't waver. "Alex, I've been recording this conversation. Threatening me is a serious offense. I can take this to the police." The bravado drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, frightened boy. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized the gravity of his actions. "Please, no. I was just talking big. I'm not in any gang. I don't want any trouble with the police." His sudden shift from intimidation to desperation made me pause. He was on the verge of revealing something more, something that might explain the bizarre turn of events. Sitting back, I watched Alex's face, tear-streaked and pale, as he prepared to spill the secrets he'd been holding onto. "All right, Alex, let's hear it then. What's going on?" Through sobs, Alex began to unravel the web of lies. "It started off small, just me wanting some extra cash. But then I found something about Dad." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What did you find about your dad, Alex?" He wiped his eyes, taking a shaky breath. "I found out he was seeing someone, not just anyone, someone from his past. I took pictures, threatened to tell you unless he kept sending money." My world spun with his confession. "Tom has been unfaithful? And you've been blackmailing him?" Alex nodded miserably. "Yes. I never meant for it to get this far. I wanted to live a certain way, and when I found out about Dad, it seemed like an easy way to keep the money coming." I felt a mix of anger and pity. "Alex, do you realize how serious this is? Blackmail is a crime. And your father, how could he?" He sniffled, looking down. I know it's messed up. I don't know, I got in too deep. But I swear, Eliza, I don't want to cause any more trouble. I'll stop. I'll figure something else out." I sighed, the weight of the situation heavy on my shoulders. "And the band, the tours, all of that was just a lie?" He nodded again. "Yeah. I'm sorry. I like music, sure, but there was no band. I just needed a story for the money." I sat back, processing everything. My husband had been unfaithful, my stepson a blackmailer. The foundation of my family was cracked and broken. "Alex, I need to talk to your father about this. And you need to sort yourself out. This isn't the way to go through life." He nodded, a small glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "I know. I'm sorry, Eliza. Really." As the call ended, I was left in a silent house, the echo of Alex's confessions ringing in my ears. The lies were unraveling, revealing a painful truth I could no longer ignore. I knew the next step was confronting Tom, but a part of me dreaded what that confrontation would bring. The man I had built a life with was a stranger, and our marriage a facade. I needed to gather my strength, for the conversation ahead would be the most challenging of my life. The house felt unbearably quiet as I waited for Tom to return. The ticking of the clock seemed to echo my racing heart, each minute stretching longer than the last. When I finally heard the turn of the key in the lock, my stomach knotted with anxiety. Tom entered, immediately sensing the storm brewing in the air. "Eliza, what's wrong? You look like you're about to explode." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Tom, we need to talk. Now." He hesitated, then nodded, taking a seat across from me. "What's it about?" I didn't beat around the bush. "It's about Alex, Tom. And it's about you. I know everything, the blackmail, the affair." Alex confessed. Tom's face paled, his eyes widening in shock. What? "Eliza, I can explain." I felt a surge of anger. "Explain? How can you possibly explain lying to me, allowing your son to blackmail you, and using our money to cover up your affair?" He looked down, shame etched across his face. "I was afraid, Eliza. Afraid of losing you. I thought I could control the situation, but it spiraled out of control." I shook my head, my voice rising. "Control? You call this control? You've been living a double life, Tom. And all the while, lying to my face." Tom's voice broke. "I'm sorry, Eliza. I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't know how to handle it." I stood up, my hands trembling with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Tom. Your son was threatening me, using gang connections to intimidate me because of your mistakes." Tom stood as well, reaching out to me. "Please, Eliza, let's try to work this out. I'll do anything." I pushed his hand away. "Work this out? How can I possibly trust you again? How can we go back to how things were knowing what I know now?" He had no answer, just stood there, a man broken by his own deceit. I knew then that our marriage was beyond repair. The trust that once bound us together had been shattered by lies and blackmail. "Tom, I need you to leave," I said, my voice cold and final. He didn't argue, just nodded silently and walked out, the door closing with a soft click that seemed to echo the closing chapter of our life together. As I sat back down, alone in the echoing silence of our home, I felt a profound sense of loss and betrayal. But amidst the pain, there was also a flicker of relief. The truth was out, painful as it was, and now I could begin to heal, to rebuild my life on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. In the aftermath of our confrontation, the house felt empty, the silence a constant reminder of the betrayal and deceit that had unfolded. I knew I couldn't just let things end there. There needed to be consequences for the lies and the financial manipulation. It was time for a legal reckoning. I found myself sitting across from a lawyer, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. "Mrs. Johnson, I've gone through all the information you provided," he began, his tone professional yet sympathetic. "I need to pursue legal action," I stated firmly. "Not just for the divorce, but for the recovery of the money Tom used for his blackmail payments, and for the emotional distress this has caused me." The lawyer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We can certainly file for divorce on grounds of infidelity and emotional distress. As for the money, we'll need all the evidence you have of the transactions and any communication between you and your husband or stepson regarding this matter." I assured him I had kept meticulous records. I trusted Tom completely. "Never thought I'd need these as evidence against him," I admitted, a sad irony in my voice. He offered a small, reassuring smile. "You're doing the right thing by protecting yourself and your assets. This won't be easy, but I'll be with you every step of the way." The following weeks were a blur of legal documents, meetings, and court appearances. Tom looked defeated each time our paths crossed, the reality of his actions finally hitting home. At one such encounter, he approached me, his expression one of regret. "Eliza, I never wanted it to come to this. I'm sorry." I looked at him, the man I once loved, now a stranger. "Sorry isn't enough, Tom. You made your choices, and now we're both living with the consequences." The final court session was the hardest. I sat there, listening as my lawyer laid out the case, detailing the emotional and financial toll of Tom's deceit. When the judge finally spoke, granting me the divorce along with compensation for the misused funds and emotional suffering, I felt a bittersweet relief. As I walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the past months felt both heavier and lighter. I had stood up for myself, faced the legal battle, and emerged with a sense of closure, albeit a painful one. But the journey wasn't over. There were still pieces of my life to pick up, a future to rebuild. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but as I stepped out into the sunlight, I felt a glimmer of hope. I decided to visit my old friend and confidant, Martha, who had been a pillar of support through my ordeal. As I entered her cozy living room, she greeted me with a warm, knowing smile. "Eliza, look at you. How are you holding up?" she asked, ushering me to sit. I sighed, a small smile playing on my lips. "I'm okay, Martha. It's been tough, but I feel like I'm finally seeing the light at the end of this long, dark tunnel." Martha patted my hand gently. "You've been through so much, my dear. But you handled it with such grace and strength. I'm proud of you." I nodded, feeling a sense of pride myself. "It was hard, Martha, facing Tom in court, unraveling all the lies. But I stood up for myself. And now, it's time for a new beginning." Martha's eyes twinkled with encouragement. "So, what's next for Eliza Johnson?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. "First, I think I need some time to heal, to rediscover who I am outside of this whole mess. Then, I want to focus on my work, maybe even take a vacation, something I haven't done in years." "Sounds like a plan," Martha replied warmly. "And remember, Eliza, this is your chance to rewrite your story, on your own terms." Her words resonated within me. Yes, I had been through a storm, but now I had the opportunity to chart my own course. In the following weeks, I immersed myself in work and self-care. I took up yoga, started reading more, and even planned a solo trip to a place I'd always wanted to visit. Life without Tom was different, but it was mine to shape. One evening, as I was preparing for my trip, the doorbell rang. It was Alex. He stood there, looking nervous and remorseful. "Eliza, I just wanted to say I'm sorry, face to face. For everything," he stammered. I regarded him, seeing not the aggressive young man from our Skype call, but a remorseful, lost boy. "Thank you, Alex. I hope you've learned from this, and that you're making changes for the better." He nodded earnestly. "I am. And I owe it to you for standing up to me. You helped me see how wrong I was." I smiled slightly, acknowledging his apology. "Take care of yourself, Alex. And make good choices, okay?" As he walked away, I closed the door and turned back to my own path, feeling a sense of closure. The journey had been arduous, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The sun set in a blaze of glory, its vibrant hues a promise of the new chapter awaiting me. A chapter of healing, growth, and self-discovery. A new horizon was before me, and I stepped forward with determination and hope, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Life had a funny way of unfolding in our small, suburban corner of the world. I, Nancy, navigated the steady ebb and flow of life as a bank teller, while my husband, Tom, managed the intricate dance of municipal politics. Our home was a testament to Tom's family, a house passed down through generations, now echoing with the remnants of our conversations and debates. It was a typical Thursday evening, and I was rummaging through the kitchen, prepping for dinner. The aroma of cooking filled the air, a small comfort in the otherwise silent house. "Tom, dinner's nearly ready," I called out, my voice bouncing off the walls. He strolled into the kitchen, his face buried in the day's mail. Smells good. What's the occasion?" His voice carried a hint of sarcasm, typical after a long day at the office. "Just trying to keep things interesting," I replied, setting the table. "You know, spice up our routine." Tom smirked, dropping the pile of envelopes on the counter. Routine is good, Nancy. Keeps things predictable. That was Tom, always preferring the predictable, the controlled, and the comfortable. I often wondered what ran through his mind as he sifted through city issues, what dreams he chased within the confines of his calculated world. As we sat down to eat, the conversation drifted to mundane things, the leaky faucet, the Jones' new car, and the upcoming city council meeting. It was all so painfully normal until the mention of my family. "So, your nephew's coming this weekend?" Tom asked, his fork pausing midair. "Yeah, they are. Bobby's got a soccer game nearby. Thought they'd crash here afterward," I replied, trying to gauge his reaction. Tom's face hardened slightly. "Great, more chaos. Just what we need." "Oh, come on, Tom. They're just kids. Plus, it's nice having family around, don't you think?" I chided, hoping to lighten his mood. "Family's fine in small doses. But your brother's kids, they run around like wild animals. And that farm smell seems to follow them here." His words stung, an all too frequent reminder of the life I left behind and the world he never understood or cared to. "They're just excited, Tom. And they're my family." "They're part of me," I said firmly, my patience waning. Tom sighed, putting down his fork. I know. But can't they just tone it down a bit?" I shook my head, frustration simmering beneath the surface. "They're kids, Tom. They don't tone it down. That's what kids do. They play, they laugh, they make noise." The rest of the meal passed in a tense silence, the clinking of cutlery against plates filling the void between us. It was in these moments that I felt the distance growing, the gap widening between his world and mine. The morning buzzed with the usual flurry of activity, the kind that fills every working household. I was gulping down my coffee, already running through the day's tasks in my head, when my phone rang. It was an unusual time for a call, and seeing my brother's name flash on the screen sent a ripple of worry through me. "Hey, Jake, what's up?" I answered, trying to keep my voice even. "Nancy, it's Dad. He's sick, real sick." Jake's voice was strained, each word heavy with concern. I felt the air leave the room, my hand tightening around the phone. "What do you mean sick? What's happened?" "He's got cancer, Nancy. It's bad. The doctors are talking all sorts of treatments, but it's gonna cost a fortune." Jake's voice broke, the reality of our situation setting in. My mind raced, thoughts of Dad, the farm, and those childhood days flooding back. Okay. Let's figure this out. How much are we talking about? I can help." I could hear the hesitation in Jake's voice. "It's a lot, Nancy. More than any of us got. They're talking about treatments, chemo, maybe more. It's all just a lot." My heart ached, an overwhelming urge to fix it all taking hold. "I'll talk to Tom. We can use some savings, maybe get a loan. We'll find a way." With a heavy heart, I hung up and turned to find Tom standing in the doorway, a questioning look on his face. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice laced with a casual concern. I took a deep breath, the weight of the news anchoring me to the spot. "It's my dad. He's sick, really sick. Cancer. It's bad, Tom." Tom's expression shifted, the news landing with a thud. "Jesus, Nancy. I'm sorry. What do you need?" "We need money for treatment. A lot of it." "I want to help, Tom. I need to help," I said, the words tumbling out, a mix of desperation and determination. Tom ran a hand through his hair, the gears turning. "Money, huh? That's gonna be tight. But, okay, we'll look at our finances, see what we can do." I nodded, the first wave of relief washing over me. "Thank you. I knew I could count on you." The rest of the morning was a blur, calls to the hospital, more conversations with Jake, and a deep dive into our savings account. The numbers swirled before me, daunting yet necessary. This was family, and nothing was too big or too hard when it came to family. The day Dad arrived at our place was one I'd been dreading and longing for in equal measure. Tom had been oddly agreeable about Dad staying with us, which should have been my first clue that something was off. As soon as Dad's car pulled into the driveway, I rushed out, my heart aching at the sight of him. He was a shell of the robust man I remembered, his frame hunched, his face drawn with pain and weariness. "Nancy, my girl," he said, his voice weak but filled with warmth as I helped him inside. Tom came out to greet us, his smile a little too stiff, a little too forced. "Welcome, Mr. Williams. Let me show you to your room." The evening passed in a sort of anxious dance, Dad trying to appear stronger than he was, Tom playing the gracious host, and me, caught in the middle, worrying about everything unsaid. As we sat down to dinner, a heavy silence enveloped the table. Tom was the first to break it, his voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. "So, Mr. Williams, I've been thinking about your situation. I want to help, really I do." Dad nodded, a wary look in his eyes. "That's kind of you, Tom. I appreciate all the support. But," Tom continued, "I think it's only fair we discuss some terms." "Terms?" My stomach twisted at the word, a sense of dread creeping up my spine. "What do you mean, Tom?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom looked between Dad and me, his gaze calculating. "Well, it's simple really. I'll cover the medical expenses, allow you to stay here, but in return, I want the farm. All of it, transferred to me and Nancy." I stared at him, disbelief and anger churning inside me. "Are you serious right now? You can't be serious." Dad's expression hardened, his tired eyes suddenly alight with a spark of the old fire. "You want my land, my home, in exchange for helping me? It's a fair deal, don't you think?" Tom said, leaning back in his chair. "A small price to pay for your health and comfort." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was my husband, the man I'd vowed to spend my life with, and he was bargaining over my father's life like it was a business transaction. "Tom, you can't do this. It's not right. It's disgusting," I spat out, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Dad pushed his chair back, his body trembling with a mix of rage and effort. "I don't want your money, Tom. Not like this. I'd rather die than give you everything I've worked for." The room spun around me, the walls closing in. This was a nightmare, a terrible, heartless game, and Tom was revealing himself to be the villain. "Fine," Tom said, his voice cold. "Then you leave. Both of you. I won't be taken for a fool." With that, Dad grabbed his cane, his pride the only thing keeping him upright. I followed, my mind a whirlwind of hurt, anger, and disbelief. "Tom, I can't believe you. I won't let you do this to my family," I said, my voice trembling. But he didn't respond, his face set in a mask of indifference. We packed a few things, Dad's weak protests echoing in my ears. This was it. The facade had crumbled, and the man I thought I knew had vanished, replaced by a stranger with cold eyes and a colder heart. We didn't speak much on the drive to the small rental I'd managed to find on short notice. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over our heads, a place to regroup and figure out our next steps. Once inside, I helped Dad to the couch, his body sinking into the cushions with a weary sigh. "Nancy, I'm sorry. I never should have put you in this position," he murmured, his eyes downcast. "No, Dad. Don't you dare apologize. This is on Tom, not you." "I can't believe he'd do something like this," I replied, my voice fierce with anger. Dad shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "And to think I almost considered it, for a moment, to make sure you'd be taken care of. That's exactly why I'm doing all this, Dad. You took care of me my whole life. It's my turn now," I said, squeezing his hand. The following days were a blur of doctor's appointments, phone calls, and late-night internet searches for any financial aid we might qualify for. I was running on adrenaline and coffee, determined to find a way to afford Dad's treatment. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I came back to the rental to find Dad sitting at the small kitchen table, a stack of bills in front of him. "Nancy, sit down. We need to talk about this. Realistically," he said, his voice steady but tired. I pulled up a chair, my stomach in knots. "What is it, Dad?" He pushed the bills toward me, his finger tapping on the total amount due. "This is more than you can handle, Nancy. I can't let you ruin your life for me." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Dad, I'm not having this conversation. I'll find a way. We'll find a way. Together." Dad reached across the table, his rough hand covering mine. "Nancy, listen to me. I've lived a good life. I've seen you grow into a remarkable woman. If it's my time, then so be it. But you have so much more to live for. Don't let this destroy you." I shook my head, pulling my hand away. "No. I refuse to accept that. We're going to fight this, Dad. Until the very end." The determination in my voice seemed to give Dad a small spark of hope, or perhaps he just didn't have the heart to argue any further. We spent the rest of the evening in a quiet, mutual understanding, both of us too stubborn and too scared to consider giving up. Days turned into weeks, and despite the ever-present shadow of illness and financial strain, we found small moments of joy, old stories retold, laughter shared over simple meals, and quiet evenings watching whatever was on TV. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and for the moment, it was enough. 3 months had flown by in a blur of hospital visits, a relentless battle against the merciless tide of illness. Despite our best efforts and boundless hope, my father's condition deteriorated under the weight of the aggressive cancer. It was a losing fight, but one we endured together, with the stubbornness and heart that characterized our simple, hardworking family. My father's passing was quiet, a gentle surrender in the early hours of a gray morning. The pain of losing him was sharp, a raw wound that seemed to echo through the empty spaces of our rented home. The funeral was a somber affair, filled with hushed voices and tear-stained faces, a final goodbye to a man who had been the bedrock of our family. After the guests had left, the condolences spoken, and the last of the dishes put away, I sat with my brother, Jake, on the porch of our family home. The air was heavy with unspoken words, a shared grief hanging between us. "Emma, he was so proud of you. We both are. You did everything you could." I nodded, the weight of grief a tangible thing on my shoulders. "I just wish it could have been different." Jake hugged me, and we stood there, in the fading light, saying goodbye to our father, to a part of our lives that we'd never get back. The days after the funeral were heavy and quiet, filled with the kind of emptiness that follows a storm. I spent long hours staring at the land, our land, stretching out with rows of corn and the old oak tree standing tall against the skyline. It was more than just soil and crops, it was Dad's legacy, a testament to his life's work. Jake and I had been going through Dad's papers, trying to sort out his affairs, when I stumbled upon a series of letters and notes. They were inquiries and offers on the land, some dated back a few months, others more recent. Each one hinted at the value of the land, suggesting it was set to skyrocket with the city's expansion plans. "Jake, look at this," I called out, my hand trembling slightly as I held out the papers. He came over, his eyes scanning the documents quickly. "What the hell? These offers are huge, Nancy. And they're all pretty recent." I nodded, the pieces of the puzzle starting to click into place. It makes sense now. This is why Tom was so eager to get his hands on the land. He knew about this, somehow. He knew and tried to use Dad's illness to pressure us into signing it over. Jake's face darkened, a mix of anger and disbelief etched into his features. That snake. Using our own dad's sickness for his gain. "We've got to do something about this, Nancy." I agreed, the fire of determination igniting within me. "We will. We'll make sure this land stays in the family, just like Dad wanted. And as for Tom, he's going to regret ever trying to cheat us." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. We met with lawyers, talked to the city planners, and started to piece together a plan. The land was indeed about to become very valuable, and we were determined to protect it, to ensure it benefited the family and honored Dad's memory. But as we dug deeper, the reality of the situation became clear. We were up against more than just greedy land speculators. We were dealing with a network of information and influence, and at the center of it all was Tom. One evening, as Jake and I sat exhausted from another day of meetings and calls, the phone rang. It was Tom, his voice smooth and eerily calm. "Nancy, we need to talk. I've been hearing things about the land. I think we can come to an agreement, something beneficial for both of us." I felt a surge of disgust listening to him, the man I had once loved, now nothing more than a conniving stranger. "There's nothing to talk about, Tom. You tried to cheat my family, to take advantage of my father's death. You're not getting a single inch of that land," I replied, my voice steely and resolute. Tom let out a dry laugh. "Nancy, don't be naive. This is business. I was just trying to secure our future, our wealth. Let's meet, discuss this like adults." I clenched the phone tighter, the anger boiling inside me. "The only business I'll be discussing with you is the divorce. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, Tom. Goodbye." The days following my final conversation with Tom were fraught with a tense anticipation. Jake and I had enlisted a sharp-witted lawyer, Mr. Henderson, who specialized in estate and property law. He was a no-nonsense type, with a keen eye for detail and a deep understanding of the underhanded tactics used by those looking to exploit others. We sat in Mr. Henderson's office, the walls lined with legal tomes and certificates, as he laid out the strategy. "Now, Nancy and Jake, I've seen this type of thing before. Wealthy individuals trying to cash in on insider information. It's illegal and immoral. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "What do we need to do?" "I want to make sure Tom pays for what he tried to do." Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses, his eyes sharp. "First, we gather all the evidence. The offers on the land, the communications from Tom, anything that can show his intent and knowledge of the land's value." Jake leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "We've got plenty of that. Emails, letters, even some voicemails he left Nancy." "Good," Mr. Henderson replied, "that's a start. Next, we file for an injunction to prevent any sale or transfer of the land until this is resolved. That will protect your asset." The next few weeks were a blur of legal motions, affidavits, and tense waiting. Tom, it seemed, was not going down without a fight. His own lawyers were pushing back, painting him as an innocent party, just trying to take care of his sick father-in-law. But we had the truth on our side, and slowly, the evidence began to pile up against him. The turning point came when one of Tom's associates, caught up in another investigation, decided to turn state's evidence, providing a direct link between Tom and the speculators looking to buy the land. The day we received the news, Jake and I met at the local diner, a spot we'd come to frequent for its strong coffee and quiet corners. "Nancy, this is it. This guy's testimony is going to nail Tom. He's not getting out of this," Jake said, a hint of triumph in his voice. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness a match for my mood. "Good. He deserves everything that's coming to him. I just wish it hadn't come to this, you know?" Jake reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "I know, sis. But you're doing the right thing. Protecting the land, our family. It's what Dad would have wanted." The trial was a spectacle, the media latching onto the story of a local official caught in a web of greed and deceit. Tom's face was plastered on every news outlet, the details of his scheming laid bare for all to see. And when the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that justice had been served, but sadness for the man I had once loved, now just a shadow of his former self. The courthouse steps were behind us, the weight of months of legal battles lifted. I took a deep breath, the air tasting fresher, sweeter somehow. Jake and I walked in silence, each lost in thought, until we reached the old diner that had become our haven. Sliding into the booth, the familiar clatter of dishes and murmur of conversation wrapped around us like a comforting blanket. Jake ordered us coffee, and we sat, the steam curling up between us. You know, Nancy, I think this is the first time I've seen you look relaxed in months, Jake said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I laughed, a genuine, light sound that felt foreign after all this time. Yeah, it's over, isn't it? I can finally move on, start fresh. He nodded, his eyes warm. You've got a whole new life ahead of you, sis. What's the plan? I stirred my coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug. Well, I've been thinking. I want to do something with the land. Not sell it off or anything, but maybe start a community garden, or a space for kids to learn about farming. Something that would make Dad proud. Jake's eyes lit up, enthusiasm radiating from him. That's a fantastic idea, Nancy. You always had a knack for dreaming big. I'm in, whatever you need. We spent the next hour talking excitedly about the possibilities, the dream taking shape between us. It felt good, right, to be planning for the future instead of reeling from the past. As we left the diner, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The fight was over, but the journey was just beginning. I made my way to the small apartment I'd called home since leaving Tom. It was modest, but it was mine, a sanctuary from the world outside. Opening the door, I stepped inside, the quiet enveloping me. I wandered over to the window, the view stretching out to the city skyline in the distance. The land, our land, lay between here and there, a green expanse filled with potential and promise. The phone rang, startling me from my reverie. I picked it up, a familiar voice on the other end. Hey, Emma, it's Lucy, from the bank. I heard about everything, and I just wanted to say, if you need anything, we're all here for you. I smiled, touched by the offer. Thanks, Lucy. I appreciate it. Actually, there might be something. I'm thinking of starting a project on the land, something community-focused. Maybe the bank could be a part of it? Lucy's excitement was palpable, even through the phone. Absolutely, Emma. That sounds amazing. Let's set up a meeting, talk about what you need. We'd love to be involved. Hanging up, I felt a surge of excitement. The project was more than just a dream now, it was a possibility, a real, tangible future. I sat down, a small notebook and pen in hand, and began to jot down ideas, plans, names. The page filled up quickly, a testament to the flurry of thoughts and hopes swirling through my mind. It was a new beginning, not just for me, but for the community, for the legacy of the land. And as I wrote, I could almost feel Dad's presence, his quiet strength and unwavering support guiding me forward. The path ahead was uncharted, filled with challenges and opportunities, but I was ready. Ready to build, to grow, and to thrive. This was more than just a new chapter, it was a whole new book, and I was the author, pen in hand, ready to write a story of hope, perseverance, and renewal. The end was just the beginning.